We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Miguel Ampuero. I'm an educational consultant with the Autism Initiative ABA Supports, and I'm in charge of introducing our speaker today. Before we get to that, just a few announcements. Just remember that the exhibit hall today is open until 5:30. We have, you're all invited to the reception poster session in Art of Expression in Dean's Hall, and that is going to run from 3:30 to 5:30 today. Remember that if you want to get continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk prior to your departure on your last day of attendance. Remember to get the codes if you're seeking CEUs at the end of the session. You can also access the PowerPoint and all the materials from sessions from the Groupio app. And at the end of your stay, your departure, we're also asking you to please complete for each session the feedback forms. And now on to our speaker. I am very happy and excited to introduce Dr. Hanley today. He's been applying the principles of learning to improve socially important behaviors of children and adults with and without disabilities for over 25 years. He worked and trained at the Spurwink School, the Groton Center, and the Kennedy Krieger Institute, was degreed at the University of Florida, tenured at the University of Kansas, and is currently a professor of psychology, director of the Behavior Analysis Doctoral Program at the Western New England University, and an adjunct professor of psychiatry at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Dr. Hanley is also a director of this Life Skills Clinic and its consulting group. Dr. Hanley has published over 100 book chapters and articles in peer-reviewed journals on the prevention, assessment, and treatment of problem behavior and evidence-based values. Dr. Hanley is a fellow of the American Psychological Association, Division 25, past editor of the Behavior Analysis and Practice, past associate editor of the Behavior Analyst and the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and current editor of Java. Without further ado, our speaker today, Dr. Greg Hanley.
Thank you, Miguel. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have about 3 hours, and this first session I'm going to talk about assessment. There's some people here who are maybe familiar with the process that my research and practice group uses, and so I'm going to try to make sure we escalate this conversation to a point where we get to implementation issues and obstacles, and I might ask you to bring up some obstacles and questions to facilitate that conversation towards the end. That said, there may be some people in the room that don't know anything I'm talking about here, and I want to make sure I don't lose you, and so I am going to start from the beginning, if you will. Could I just get a quick show of hands? How many people know what an ISCA is? Okay, that's great. How many people have successfully implemented an ISCA? Okay. Very good. So I think we're in the right place with that balance based on the number of hands. Okay. Let's get right to it. You know, autism is diagnosed by deficits in some social functioning and language and some need for sameness or repetitive behavior. It's not diagnosed when someone has meltdowns, aggression, self-injury, property destruction. However, those often come along for the ride, right? If you work with kids with autism, you know that. About 30% of kids on the spectrum will engage in one of those behaviors I mentioned with great regularity while they're young. Thank you. I think that's better. Yes, very good. In fact, half of kids with autism will engage in any single topography. 30% engage in all of them with some regularity before they're teenagers. And so we have to figure out, why is this happening? And maybe more important, to send the message to parents and families and other constituents that it's not inevitable. That these behaviors I have here listed in red are accidents of learning, that kids with autism learn differently, and they accidentally are more likely to learn these behaviors, and we can teach them other ways to get their wants and needs met. These behaviors are not inevitable. It saddens me as I troll YouTube, and I do troll YouTube for autism and parents, and I see new videos all the time of parents laying on their child with autism on their kitchen floor while the child's trying to headbang or attack them, and they turn to the camera and say, "This is autism." And I say, "This is an accident, a historical, sad accident." And so we're going to spend 3 hours today trying to move beyond this accident to really understand how we can move it around so that we can teach through the language issues and the social issues, not with this stuff in the way. Okay, it's not inevitable. Despite the fact that it's not inevitable, there are some kids who engage in these behaviors for their life. I've met 5-year-olds who have these forms of behavior. The professionals are trotting out topography graphs. Here's the rate of self-injury. Here's the rate of property destruction. Here's elopement. 5 years later, I meet up with that same family, that same child, and the same topography graphs are being shown. And then I unfortunately have some experiences where I've met up with them when they're teenagers. The same graphs are shown, but it's pretty low rate. It's low rate because that child is sitting on a beanbag chair in urine-soaked sweatpants, eating Cheetos out of a cup. They're overweight, soft, pasty, sweaty. You know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry to start out the day so negative, but I need you to see that. If you don't know the picture I just painted, good for you. You must have just entered the field. But that exists. And so this is despite well-meaning professionals orbiting around these families. So I want you to give thought to, given this day and age, awareness is there, licensure, insurance, we have it. Why is this still happening? And I want to move you away from thinking, well, that kid is unique. They're uniquely tough. They're biologically so different that it's almost inevitable. Because that's, I don't believe, the case. So let's play the blame game, at least privately, for a minute. Why does that happen? Well-meaning professionals orbiting around kid, yet the lifestyle dictated by problem behavior happens. Families don't leave the house. That kid's in the basement. Not much of a life. Everyone's walking on eggshells. So think about where that comes from. This is opinion, this next slide. I don't have hard data on this. I call it the 5 M's. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but I'll just go through them really quick. Why does problem behavior persist for many kids on the spectrum? These are the things to blame, at least for me. I look inward. I look towards our profession. I look towards other professions. Behavior modification. I am not a behavior modifier most of the time. I'm a behavior analyst. The difference is simple. I try to understand behavior before I attempt to change behavior. That's behavior analysis. Behavior modification is merely taking reinforcers and punishers, applying them to change behavior. BMOD works. I do BMOD sometimes. If I have a child in the clinic and the parent reports they can't put that liquid gold in the bank, otherwise known as the toilet, I'm going to teach them that that toilet's an important place. And I'm going to use Skittles. I'm going to stick Skittles right in their mouth. I'm not going to have a glove on, and I'm going to do it right in the bathroom. Okay? And I'm going to do it after they complete so they don't get so psyched about the Skittle that they finish in the hallway as we walk out. Okay. But when a child has severe problem behavior, they're hitting themselves, they're hitting other people, they're destroying properties, they're already motivated. I do not need extra motivation. They're motivated. I need to figure out what that motivation is and then use it to teach a skill-based repertoire. Behavior modification does not do that. Behavior modification simply applies arbitrary rewards, arbitrary punishers to the behavior in hopes of changing it. And understand it works and it's professionally reinforcing to us. Earlier in my career, I would have those topography graphs. I put that phase line. I put my DRO. As long as you don't engage in problem behavior, you get the cookie, the privilege, the treat, the token. And do I see an effect? Yes. And is that satisfying? Yes. And when do I make a change? Right before the meetings. I bring my graph and like, whoop, look at that. We got a nice change. 3 months later, there's another phase line because, you know, I got to spice up the reinforcer because it got old or the integrity suffered a little bit. But then I'm going to have to add some punishment at some point. I'm going to have to do response costs at timeout because that's the humane thing to do. So there's going to be some loss in the program. Does that work? Of course it does. It's going to push the behavior down. But is it ever going to free that child of problem behavior? No, because we don't understand why they're doing it in the first place. We're trying to override the personal motivation for the behavior with arbitrary contingencies. That's BMOD. It's no longer defensible. But that's what we do. That's what I see when I go into schools and homes and classrooms. That's what's going on. We are not living up to our name of applied behavior analysts. We are applied behavior modifiers. And that's partly because our analytic technology was not meant for practice. It was not ready for prime time. And so that's why I'm okay talking to you about our process right now, because I believe it fits within whatever context you're working in. We do this stuff in homes, schools, specialized schools, public schools, right out in the open, fully transparent. Our policy is parents and teachers, we want you with us the whole time. You don't go away and we take your child and do things. You stay with us. It's a collaborative, transparent, open process of trying to understand just a little bit before we attempt to change behavior. Medication, I'm not going to get too far into this. Understand I'm part of a psychiatry department, so I'm not speaking behind psychiatrists' back. There are clearly conditions for where medication is important for comorbid conditions. Can kids with autism have anxiety? That's above the fray, and depression, of course. ADHD, those meds are pretty effective. However, many kids with autism are giving pills because they're engaging in meltdowns, aggression, and self-injury. And there is no pill you can put in a child's mouth to teach a skill. And if you don't teach skills, they're not going to be better off in that next place. Skills travel with the child. The pills don't help teach the skills. And in fact, in my clinic, we've learned that they retard the progress of skill development. When kids are on too many pills and they're falling asleep during session and they're drooling and their head's bopping, I can't teach. It's all about teaching skills. I can't teach when they're overly medicated. So we have a policy. We work with our behavioral developmental pediatricians. You remove the meds to control behavior, and then we will work with your child. Your child is lucid, and they're motivated. And the risk isn't great if you understand why they're engaging in problem behavior and manage it effectively. Why do these lifestyles persist? I think the cure of medication is the curse for many kids that we serve. Mollification, this word isn't terribly precise, and you may not know what it means. I didn't know what it meant either. I just needed a thesaurus because I needed an M word. And it's not the best one, but it'll do. Mollification means appeasement. It means dancing around the problem. It means if Johnny doesn't like tags in his shirts, we'll buy him shirts without tags. They don't like their food touching, we'll buy plates that separate. They don't want to sit next to Mary, get the hell out of here. And the list goes on, right? And mollification is kind. Mollification is caring. Mollification is effective. If you get rid of the provocative, challenge, evocative event, problem behavior goes away. It's very satisfying to all involved. When I did direct care, which I did for many years in group homes, I would ask the psychologist, you know, I understand this extinction thing, I get the concept and all, but what can I do before that large man attacks me? I need something antecedent, proactive. That's what I was pining for as a direct care staff. But what I didn't understand back then, and I fully think I understand now, is that when we mollify, when we make changes into the antecedents, we are removing not only problem behavior, but the opportunity to teach. Because those situations will represent themselves. The main mollifier goes on vacation. The new staff will say that thing they're not supposed to say, do that thing they're not supposed to do. And if we don't systematically expose kids to those challenging, evocative, provocative events, thoughtfully, carefully, systematically, and teach skills so they can handle those events, that child is going to be restricted by problem behavior for the rest of their life. Mollification is professionalized. Positive behavioral support, I like it. I like what it's done for many kids. I don't like that it emphasizes the antecedent approach. It's half-baked. It is not forward-thinking enough. So we mollify for safety, but we know that that Band-Aid needs to come off. And the Band-Aid won't be ripped off. It'll be gently, with a little rubbing alcohol, taken off. Okay? Mollification is a short-term solution. I'll talk a little bit about microanalysis. It's basically, I think we break contingencies down a little into small bits. It makes sense. All science starts out reducing their phenomena. Once they understand it, they got to put it back together. And I think we're at a point in our field that we need to start putting some things back together, so we'll talk about that. And then I already talked about skill development. Skills travel. I remember a funny event that happened repeatedly to me as direct care staff. I did direct care in the neighborhood that I had an apartment, so we would go out in the community in the area that I hung out in, essentially, as a young man. And in the home, I would have a fanny pack, and in my fanny pack, I had chocolates and tokens and clickers and rubber handcuffs and, everything I needed for that, let's call him Johnny. And in the home, everything was pretty good. There was these flare-ups, but in general, things are good. When we went out in the community, I was a little embarrassed to wear the fanny pack. I'll be honest with you. Fanny packs, I know they're coming back, thanks Europeans, but they're still weird. So I didn't want to wear the fanny pack, so I'd go out to the basketball court with the guys, and I would leave the fanny pack. Oh, I forgot it in the van. Well, very forgetful. Not, I was on purpose. And there was problems. There was always problems. Oh, maybe he doesn't like basketball. Well, now I know it's because he's managed by this fanny pack and all its control. Merely managing the behavior. Skills. When you teach skills, they travel. Kids take them with them. The whole issue of, that ABA stuff, it doesn't generalize. It does if you teach skills. Okay, so we're going to focus on skills in the second part of today, if you join me there. Okay, I mentioned this yesterday if you came to the education panel, but I'm going to go through it quickly. It's a powerful, our underlying assumption. If problem behavior is occurring with regularity, it's being reinforced. It's so simple we forget that. We have conversations about everything except what's the reinforcer, or now what are the reinforcers. Tim Vollmer's made some good points at this conference that we have to work on interdisciplinary teams and ruling out medical factors, and I 100% agree. However, my process is slightly different in the sense that I don't wait for things to be ruled in or out or effectively managed by other professionals, because if problem behavior is occurring with regularity, it's being reinforced. If the child has a bellyache, if the child has a really severe pain in their gut, it still doesn't necessitate self-injury or aggression. If a child has gastrointestinal issues, that should not necessarily lead to SIB and aggression. Some of you right now are experiencing gastrointestinal issues, yes? Okay, some of you, don't raise your hands, but, okay. But no one is punching themselves. No one is hitting their neighbor that I can see. And so I want the same for kids with autism. I hold them to those high expectations too. And so I'm not saying we don't work on interdisciplinary teams. Of course we do. And we don't rule out the medical. We let the medical people do their job. But I won't be delayed. If they're punching their head on a Monday, I'm working with them on Tuesday. I'm not waiting for the tests to come in or the meds to change or stabilize. We need to get moving now. And that's the message I'm trying to communicate with this powerful assumption. Okay. You've seen these. These are very simple contingencies that operate in homes all the time. I'm going to just unpack contingency. Contingency is just an if-then. So if the behavior occurs, there's this characteristic consequence. It occurs in a context. That context is sometimes called the antecedent, or nowadays often called the establishing operation. Establishing operation is the fanciest term I'll use today. It simply means there's some environmental event that potentiates a reinforcer, potentiates an event, and thereby evokes the behavior that historically has produced that event. That's all an EO is. So let's just talk about them just for a moment. When I was younger, and my kids were younger, they're older now, but when they were little guys, 2 and 3 years old, and little girl, I loved them so much, I wanted to eat them. And so I knew that would be wrong. And so instead, I just kind of kissed on them a lot, and I would even lick them. I just lick my daughter. I'm like, ooh, sweaty, young. Very weird. So I'm just sharing with you, just so you loosen up. And so I think perhaps I taught my kids to keep their distance in the morning and whatnot. And so I'd want some love from them, but they wouldn't give it to me. Sometimes they'd just be building or doing their thing. And so, but I did notice that if I came down in a sports coat, and I looked like I was going to work for the day, all of a sudden my kids were talking to me a little more. They told me what happened, previous night when I wasn't there, if I was teaching or something. I then noticed that if I bring my roller bag out, my daughter wants to sit in my lap, my son's all clowning for me. I'm like, oh, what's that? The roller bag is an EO. My jacket is an EO. They're conditioned EOs. That just means they're learned. EOs are often things that signal you're going to lose something important to you and or you're not going to have it for some time. It's not that you haven't had it for some time. That's a straight up EO. It's that there's a signal that you're not going to have it right in the next minute or for an extended period of time. And those signals are what we also need to figure out for kids with problem behavior. What are those unique roller bag EOs, okay? That's what we figure out in the process. So it's one, let's figure out what the reinforcers are, and two, let's figure out what those unique learned establishing operations are. And if we learn those two things, we can create a very powerful teaching context to get some skills off the ground that just may generalize to the important environments. Again, I emphasized this yesterday. I'm going to be emphasizing it again because it's the linchpin, I think, of our efficacy and our colleagues' efficacy, and that is, I don't do this one thing at a time model anymore. That's what I mean by micro-analytic or hyper-analytic. I do a many things at a time model. I'm not afraid to slop it up and try to emulate the environment because I've learned over many years that if I don't emulate the ecology, if I don't combine reinforcers and EOs, I can't get powerful outcomes. I get unsafe teaching conditions. I get conditions that necessitate all those things that no one wants to do. Restraint, for one. Okay. But when I use the many things at a time model, I'll share with you this afternoon and some this morning, I can have a hands-off approach. We can have kids with severe problem behavior in clinics that have no padded walls. The door to the clinic room is open. You can leave at any time. I can do that when I have powerful contingencies, and I couldn't do that when I was engaging in micro-analytic behavior. So again, I'll show you a video. I'm sorry if you were there last night and may have seen this. I want you to check out this video. This is a video of a mom in a home. We have a home-based prevention program. It's not published yet. It's called the Balance Program. In it, we get some baselines, and then we support parents in teaching skills. We visit twice a week for an hour. We don't touch the child. The parents do all the teaching, but we support them with videos, a manual, and feedback, and graph the data and all that kind of stuff. In baseline, we simply ask parents, half the time, follow your child's lead. Play with them. The other half of the time, we want you to impose your will. Get done what needs to get done in the house, okay? And we'll watch. And so this video is taken from that prompt. And this is a very highly educated mom. She's a physician. She's read every parenting magazine. She's well-versed. And she has a child newly diagnosed on the spectrum. What I want you to notice are the multiple EOs. There's not one EO happening here. I want you to notice the multiple consequences that this child is receiving following these behaviors. I want you to also see how these behaviors cluster together. Here are the take-home points. I don't separate the EOs. I don't separate the reinforcers, and I definitely don't separate the response classes. I do not have 7 programs for 7 problem behaviors. I have one program because those problem behaviors tend to be functionally related, controlled by the same contingency. So I want you to see that example in this baseline, please. You're not getting any audio, are you? It's weak. It's got to be better than that. Give me one moment. Speakers, headphones. Yeah, it's at 100%, so I'm not sure that's the solution. Let's see. Good idea, though, but I'm going to switch the audio setting from HDMI to the headphones, back to the headphones. We'll try that again. If not, I'll just talk through it, and I'll figure it out at the break.
We can call tech if you want to.
Yeah, if you would, but no worries.
We're going to do a minute of the standing castle, and then we're going to clean up those books over there, because we're not reading them right now. See that?
Prompt, rationale.
Oh, we feel it. Alright, what are we going to do now?
Trying to get them to repeat the instructions.
Press the button. We're going to come back to a different activity when we're done. Press the button, please. We have to clean up those books.
Repeated prompt.
What did we say? What did we say we were going to do when the timer was up?
Notice he's
You want
emitting
to press
no
the button or do you want me
language
to press the button?
that's meaningful.
Okay. Well, do you want to press the button or do you want me to press the button?
Choice upgrade.
Good. Alright, now I'm going to do it.
Follow through.
Honey. Next time you use iPad, honey.
Dan, little brother. Awesome.
I will not let Ethan do it. Honey,
Mom is then taught to teach skills in the exact same evocative context using the exact same reinforcers. This is the beginning.
We're going to take a break from the iPad.
Okay.
Thank you for being okay. I need you to put away some trains for me, please, in the rhino.
Watch how he checks in with her as he's cleaning up.
Oh, good job, Taylor. Thank you for putting away those trays. You can have this back. You need to skip steps.
She taught in the same evocative context that has presumably more than one establishing operation. She's using more than one reinforcer to motivate him to learn skills. We teach repertoires. The repertoires involve communication, toleration, and what we now call contextually appropriate behavior or compliance. FCT is not a treatment, it's a step towards a treatment, okay? That's merely communicating. The real issue is, can you handle it when your words don't work? That's what we call toleration. And then once a child can tolerate, we ask parents to start imposing their will a little bit and paying off those behaviors. Understand, this boy's checking back in because his history is such that he never knows when mom is going to provide that reinforcer. We call keeping hope alive. We keep hope alive through intermittent and unpredictable reinforcement. Sometimes his words work. Excuse me, Mommy, may I play my way? Of course you can, son. And that way he continues to ask that question. But most of the time she says, no, son, do this. And he says, okay. Or some kids say, I'm cool with that, no problem. And sometimes that pays off. The mom or teacher says, you're so good at handling disappointment, let's do your thing. But most of the time, parents say, nope, do your stuff. And sometimes they have to clean up 2 things, or 4 things, or the whole house needs to be cleaned. And they never know. And that's why we get the check-in. Is it now? Look, you see what I'm doing? Look, pretty good, huh? No? Okay, I'll keep working. You see what I did? No? So we get a lot of joint attention, check-in, showing their work, that sort of thing, merely by the intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement. There are no warnings. No picture schedules. There's no promises. It's all vague because that's what life is. Life is full of ups and downs, disappointments and opportunities, and you never know when they're going to hit. And so this is what we call the developmental schedule. It's also how kids get a repertoire of problem behavior. It's through intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement. That's why no kid has one problem behavior. They have a whole range. You never know which behavior is going to work this time with that staff or that parent or that teacher. It's the same thing. We now have repertoires, and they pay off at different points in time. This is another parent. She wasn't available for the program, so this is our first generality test. This is the first time she's doing the process in front of us, and we're videotaping. Same boy, different parent.
Hey, Will?
Yes.
Time to be all done with the iPad.
Teacher.
Yes, Will?
Bye, please.
Not right now.
Okay.
Over here, please. I need you to pick up these dirty socks and towels and bring them up to the laundry bin.
We start out with single instructions, specific instructions, but we teach parents, get vague and confusing, because that's what you
Oh,
do
you
well.
dropped some. Go back and pick them up.
We teach parents to correct
And that
kids, hold them to the
towel, too.
highest of
That's me.
expectations. Do not let them suffer from low expectations because of their new diagnosis.
Great. Now go back downstairs and finish cleaning up your truck puzzle. Time to the iPad.
Notice the check-ins.
Yeah.
Great job, kiddo. You can have more time with your iPad if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Our assessment process is dignified in the sense that parents socially validate it. We ask them questions. What did you think about the process? And they like it. And say, do you think we treated you and your child with respect? They say yes. And we say, why do we get that? Because I don't think I would have got those answers, those questions years ago. And I think the answer is because, first, the analysis is based on what they teach us is going on in the homes. When they see our analysis, they see their child and their interactions. It's some sort of validation. Second, we can turn behavior on and turn it off really quick. And that's powerful for parents and teachers to see. And we can do that because of these synthesized contingencies. Because we take in multiple EOs, so they're motivated to engage in some behavior. And we have multiple reinforcers, so that behavior turns off quickly. It's safe. These analyses, there is no show. I don't need nurses behind the glass giving me a hit count when they're going to terminate. There's no sweat. There's no blood. There's no pee. There's no poop. Those happen in analyses that are improperly designed. When you're trying to isolate the controlling variable, when you give kids hard work to do, and then they engage in SIB and you say, you don't have to, and then they sit there with nothing, even though 5 minutes ago they had the tangible, and 10 minutes ago they had your love. Understand those establishing operations are still operating. And so in analysis, when you try to isolate the reinforcer and you provide one reinforcer, there's still other EOs happening. And that leads to escalation of behavior. High rates is not the goal in an analysis. Control is the goal. Turn it on, turn it off. That's where safety comes from. That's where dignity comes from. So, again, I'm sorry to use that word, the D word. Some of you may find that uncomfortable. Okay. Skinner told us we don't need to worry about those things. Skinner's right on most things. I'm not sure about this one. Our process needs to be dignified. Our process needs to be one where you would want your child to be in that room. Our processes need to be such that they could be put on the evening news where everyone in the country would see them who has a child with autism and say, I want that for my child. That's when we've arrived, okay? And so you may be missing some important things from your assessment process if you follow this process. You're going to miss out on some information that you cherish. But you can have a dignified and highly effective process if you're willing to be ignorant, as I am, of certain things. So let's get to that process. We're going to talk about functional assessment. I'm going to unpack the entire process now. I want you to understand functional analysis, that's where we directly observe behavior while we manipulate the environment, is a model. We're building a model to ask the question of, in life, this is happening. Let me build a model. Let me model life to see if I can understand what's going on over there. Whenever you build a model, it's always incomplete, and there's always things that are wrong with it. You're taking life, hours and hours, days, weeks, months, years, and you're trying to squish it into 10-minute sessions, you're going to miss a few things. So we're going to be ignorant no matter which model we select. So I want you to consider this notion that all functional analyses are wrong, they're incomplete to some extent, and then we need to then focus on which ones are most useful. Useful for getting us to a socially meaningful outcome, where parents and teachers are implementing your treatment in relevant environments, homes and classrooms, over relevant time periods all day, and saying, thank you, problem solved. Which analysis is going to get you there? That's what I'd ask you to focus on. So you know functional assessment is a process, that process has three main categorical tools. There's indirect assessment, descriptive assessment, and functional analysis. There's some different words being used out there. Indirect assessment, I think we all agree on what that is. That means you're not directly observing the child, you're talking to somebody who knows the child, and you're indirectly getting information through interview. They can be open or closed-ended. Closed-ended meaning they're saying yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4. Closed-ended indirects are things like the motivation assessment scale, questions about behavioral function, half of the FAST. Okay. There's open-ended. That means you ask a question. Why do you think they're doing this? When does this happen? And parents talk, and there's a narrative, and you record the narrative. That's an open-ended indirect assessment. We rely on open-ended indirect assessments. I don't do any closed-ended assessments because they're qualitative. There's no qualitatively rich information. There's yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4 about the usual suspects. Okay? I use open-ended. I let people talk. Give me the narrative. From that narrative, I'm going to listen for the potential EOs and the potential reinforcers. Descriptive assessment. That simply means you're going to observe the child, often in the natural condition, but not necessarily, and you're going to correlate things that are happening before and after the behavior to try to infer function. I want to make something very clear. I don't do any descriptive assessment. Not a little bit. I do none. Because they lead to faulty correlations. All kids, someone's going to respond to their problem behavior, okay, but it's not necessarily maintained by attention. Every time you sneeze, someone says, God bless you. It doesn't mean your sneezing is maintained by attention because it's highly correlated, right? And so DAs tend to take a lot of time, and they mislead us, and they don't lead to a meaningful outcome. I give an assignment to my students as they walk out the door on one of these assessment classes. I say, oh, one additional assignment. Just find one study where they use the descriptive assessment and they report a socially valid outcome. Good luck. I make it seem nonchalant, like, yeah, it'll take you 5 minutes. And they struggle. I know that because I have these little discussion boards, and they're like talking to each other. Did you find one? I can't. And they scallops. Hours before class, there's a lot of chatter. No one can find one because it doesn't exist. So I understand it's a tool that we all use and we cherish, and we can get paid handsomely for going in and watching with our clipboards. But I don't do it because I'm about efficiency. I'm about trying to figure out what's the least amount of time we can spend and getting to that promised land as quick as possible, and DAs take me off that track. It doesn't mean I don't watch the child. If they come in the clinic, I'm going to watch them because I don't want them to be freaked out by people. I'm going to greet them. I'm going to play with them. But I'm not doing a DA. If anything, I'm doing a shitty analysis. Excuse me. I'm not sure I'm one to be recorded, but anyway. Basically, I greet the child and I try to see, do they get close to me? Are they socially precocious, or are they avoiding me? Are they grabbing the parent's leg or hiding behind their teacher? When they relax a little bit and start playing, I might get aggressive with my teaching. Oh, what color is that? What sound does that animal make? And see if they kind of turn me off or move towards me. I'm trying to look to see what's moving them towards or away from these social interactions and building hunches. And that helps me when I interview 5 minutes later. I go, yeah, when I did that, I noticed he did this. Is that common? And so the open-ended interview, for me, is where it's at. The descriptive assessment is just a waste of time. And it usually is a relationship killer, too. If you go into a classroom, you're usually dressed more handsomely than the teacher. You're going to stand there with your clipboard and, you know what I mean? That's a relationship killer, okay? It's awkward, it's distant, it's judgmental. When I go into a school, I say, hi, I'm Dr. Hanley. I understand you have a child with problem behavior. We have approval to go take a walk and talk. I bring cookies, we drink coffee, and I say, I don't know the child. My understanding is you know the child very well. I need you to teach me about this child. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and we're going to try to come up with a teaching context. And let's go. And now I have a relationship. We have a good collaborative relationship within 5 minutes. I don't let the DA get in the way of that. Then we always do an analysis. I do an analysis because I believe in a scientific understanding. I don't care how strong my hunch is from the interview, I still want to demonstrate that I can turn behavior on and off. It's important to me. It's important not just for a theoretical perspective, because I need to know that child is properly motivated to learn my skills. If they're not willing to have problem behavior, I don't have the right motivational context. More importantly, I need to know that if I turn it on, I need to know that I can turn it off. I deal with adults too. I deal with big people. We deal with language-able kids that use weapons. Half the kids in our clinic do not have autism. They have other sorts of diagnoses. I need to know I can get it going and get it to stop immediately. Get it going, get it to stop. And that's what I get in the analysis, confidence. Confidence to proceed safely with the therapeutic process. I get a nice baseline. So there's all good reasons to do the analysis. I understand most people don't do analyses. That's what the survey studies say. And you might not do analysis because you tried them and they may have been punishing, or you only saw them in your classroom or in a textbook, in a journal article, or heard about it, read about it, and you might be unwilling to do it. And you have to figure out what your comfort level is, but I'm going to describe our process, and I'm confident you can do it, and you can do it safely. And I would ask that you build a community around you to talk about your process, and I'll give you some other supports that you might use. You can be analytic, and you can be analytic safely and in a dignified way. So let's talk about how we do it. These are the methods in blue that generally are part of our analytic process. We don't do multiple test conditions, we do a single test condition. We don't do uniform test conditions. Don't do that, you'll hurt yourself. We base the consequences on what people tell us is happening from the interview. We synthesize contingencies. I don't ask the question, is it maintained by attention or escape or tangibles? I put them together when the interview suggests they're co-occurring in nature. This is a critical one, the fourth one, that's sometimes underemphasized, and I apologize for that, and it is we reinforce what we call an open contingency class. I'll show you videos why that's important. What I mean by that is this. I don't go in and only reinforce precursors for a child who has dangerous behavior. Think about that. So people call it precursor assessment or analysis. If you only are poised to reinforce precursors and they haul off and hit you and you don't reinforce it, what's going to happen next? They can hit you harder. Reinforcement is where the safety is. If you want a safe analysis, you have to reinforce the behavior because that's what turns it off. That's a weird thought, but let's think about that for a minute. Reinforcement affects the future probability of behavior. That's the textbook definition. We all understand that, right? The behavior, something follows a behavior, that's an improvement. In that same situation, they're more likely to engage in that behavior again in the future. That's reinforcement. We get that. But understand, locally, the effect of reinforcement is that it stops behavior. If you have the satisfactory amount and type of reinforcement, when problem behavior starts to occur and you reinforce it, it stops it. And that's where the safety can be found. That's where the dignity in the process can be had. Okay? So we don't only reinforce precursors, and we would never only reinforce dangerous behavior. The reason being is I never want to see dangerous behavior. I want to see an indicator that we're on the right track. And there's what we call an inferential leap. That if you know what's controlling a less severe behavior, that you're going to infer that that's also influencing the more severe behavior. And that's scary too for some people. The real high science-minded types don't like that. They want what we call low inference analysis. If you want to understand what's controlling SIB, you need to see SIB. That's how I used to think. But we have enough studies now, and I'll show you some data, that if you understand, if people say, yeah, before they engage in severe self-injury, they bite their finger. Before they aggress, they stomp their feet. If you show that you can turn on and off finger biting or foot stomping with some contingency, then that contingency is probably controlling aggression in SIB. And when I say probably, I mean almost certainly. And if you're wrong, your treatment process will illuminate that. Okay. I'm going to go into some painstaking detail because sometimes this stuff gets lost with just showing a graph. So this was one of the first customers to our clinic in 2012. She was a 3-year-old Latina girl. She showed up to the clinic in a beautiful white doily dress. If you know what I mean by that, like what grandma puts on coffee tables, stitched together into a dress, very impressive. She didn't get the memo, you do not wear white to a functional analysis. Nevertheless, she came in and she was reluctant to separate from her mother. We don't say if the child doesn't want to separate from her mother, we don't do that. We just go into a play space and they're playing. Mom brought a big bag of her toys. They're on the ground playing. After about 10 minutes, the girl seemed more comfortable with one of our analysts, so I asked the mom if she doesn't mind stepping out, and she didn't mind, and the girl seemed to be okay with it. We don't ask questions about children in front of them. So I asked questions to the mom. The open-ended interview is available on our website. I'll give you that link in a minute. It's freely available in multiple forms. You can write in it, change it. There's nothing great about it. It's just a way to get the conversation started. Basically, there's hypothetical questions we rely on. They're the best questions. People are defensive when you say, what happens following problem behavior? You might not get great answers. But when you ask hypotheticals, people move outside the defensiveness. These are things that are hypotheticals to staff, for instance. When do you call for backup? When do you know it's going to go down? those are indicators of precursor behaviors, for instance. If you want to ask what the possible reinforcers are, you're going to ask for things that stop the behavior. So you might say, hypothetically, the child's having, and this is what we asked for this mom, hypothetically, she's having a full-out meltdown. She would get on the floor, flail, bite, scratch. She'd do it for extended periods. If that was happening, there was $1 million on the table, are you confident you could earn this $1 million and make that behavior stop within 10 seconds? So you have 10 seconds to stop that behavior. Could you do it? Are you confident? Scale of 1 to 10. Mom says, yes, I'm very confident I could stop it. Okay, what would you do? She said, I'd send my siblings and my husband and mom, they all live together, out of the kitchen. I would put my daughter in my lap, and I would give her my undivided attention and play with her favorite toys with her. Follow her lead. She likes to play particular ways. Okay, it would turn off. She said, oh, it would definitely turn off. Great. Another hypothetical, another $1 million. She's having a beautiful day like she is right now. We can see her down the hallway. Could you turn it on? 10 seconds. Could you make her have a meltdown? Yes. Okay, what would you do? She said it's the opposite. I would just abruptly take her off my lap. I'd put her toys away, and I'd talk to someone else. She said if I really want it to happen, I'd take her toys and go play with her sister. Okay. That's what I'm looking for. Now, I'm not asking any questions but those kind of normal hypotheticals. Now, what am I listening for? When I'm hearing things that stop behavior, I'm hearing the reinforcers. What reinforcers did I hear? Attention, tangibles. Okay. What are the EOs? Yeah, mom's signaling that her attention is going to be diverted elsewhere, and the removal of toys. This is straightforward. This is the most straightforward case. I was loving it. Okay, that's a good hunch. But now we're going to demonstrate whether or not we can actually influence behavior that way. And again, this is not just a scientific parlor trick. I need to know this because I need to know the child's motivated. I need to know the child and the team will be safe in the teaching process. I need to know that I can get a baseline from which to evaluate treatment. These are all things we get by doing an analysis. So now after that 30-minute conversation, and we have an outpatient clinic. You don't need those, but nevertheless, we're in a session room. We're going to do the control condition first. The control condition means she's going to get all her suspected reinforcers for free the entire time. Nothing fancy. No changeover delay, no fancy DROs with this, that, and the other thing thrown in. And it's all the suspected reinforcers for free the whole time. This is easy for mom to do. Mom's doing the analysis. She does what she told us she would do to zero out behavior. She put her child in her lap and she played with her, undivided attention. Another adult was in the room, she ignored the adult. Those little dots represent repeated control sessions. They're 5 minutes long, where we're simply watching for problem behavior, and we're seeing none. Okay. Now we're going to go to the test. The test session is where we emulate the story that seems to evoke the behavior. But we're going to teach mom to reinforce it immediately so it turns off. It's going to look like this. Mom's going to evoke the behavior by removing her child from her lap and trying to put her toys up. At the first instance of problem behavior, she's going to reward it by putting her back on her lap, giving her undivided attention, and giving her her toys. 30 seconds later, the analyst says, Mom, try again. Mom puts the EO in place, problem behavior happens, she reinforces it. So please understand, it's counterintuitive if you're new to this. It seems weird to put a child in a situation and reinforce their behavior. That is weird. So let's just all agree on that. If you're all comfortable with that, you've grown too comfortable perhaps. That's counterintuitive. You have to walk parents through it. So part of what we do in the 30-minute interview is educate. That, okay, maybe I touched something. I'm sure it's on me. We're good now. Okay. And so I promise I won't do that again. What did I just say? I just punished it. I'll never say it again. I can't even remember it. It was so aversive. Anyways, in the test session, you're reinforcing behavior. And you understand that that's weird and you have to walk people through it. You got to walk people through why you're doing it because you need to see it. And you need to know that you can turn it off with reinforcement. And that's also why we do that open contingency class. I don't want to see her melting down and scratching and all that. I want to see the very beginning of it. I want to see an indicator that we're on the right path. And so what it looked like was mom took her off her lap, and the child did one of those back flippy, back archy things. I don't have a padded floor. And mom was like a superhero, just boop, put her arm out and caught her, put her right back in her lap. Girl settled right down. 30 seconds later, mom tried again. Okay, I'm going to talk to Mr. Nick. Let's put those toys away. In the second response, the girl went, nah, and mom reinforced that. And by the fifth or so establishing operation, like 2.5 minutes into the session, it looks like this. Okay, baby, I got to talk to Mr. Nick. Okay, we can play your way. That's it. 30 seconds later, same thing. It's what it should reduce to like a business relationship. Hi, I'm your mom. I'm going to screw with you a little bit. You're going to gauge a little bit of behavior. You're going to get your reinforcers. Let's go to work. Ching, 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 ching. Punch card. Okay, let's go. That's how mellow it should be. Functional analyses shouldn't have a lot of fireworks necessarily if you're doing it like this. It should be pretty cool. You might say, well, why do it again? Why do it? Because the child's good at problem behavior, right? They don't mind this. And I'll tell you, I know this because we give kids choices. You can come do this or you can take a walk. You don't have to do this. And they choose to do this, okay? Contingent reinforcement is preferred by everybody. And so as long as we get them at a point of strength, their repertoire is strong here, we have ecologically relevant reinforcers, kids willingly go into these processes, there's not a lot of fireworks. This is what the test condition rate looks like. Understand, the rate is about 2 a minute if you look at that average. So let's unpack that. It's terribly important to understand this. We're not looking for high rates. We're looking for control of behavior. If mom's providing the reinforcer for about 30 seconds, a rate of 2 a minute is what you're looking for. That's very efficient. It means mom puts the EO in place, problem behavior happens, mom reinforces, it turns off. So second one, there's a response. There should be no problem behavior during reinforcement. Then there's another response, then the minute's over. 2 a minute. They're 5-minute sessions, so the little girl's engaging in essence 10 behaviors. She's getting 10 trials, another way to say it, to learn about this contingency in this space. Okay. But we rapidly alternate. It doesn't go sequential like I presented it. It goes in alternations. We start with the control, then we go to test, do another test, control, test. This is functional control. We're turning on and off the behavior. Each data point, again, in this situation was 5 minutes. So this is a 30-minute period. So when we report that we can do a functional assessment process in an hour, and that's generally how long it takes, not all the time, sometimes we don't get it right, but when we get it right, it's about an hour. A half-hour interview, a 20 to 30-minute analysis. 1 hour. So when BCBA is telling me they don't have time to do a functional analysis, I think that was true in the past, but it's no longer the case, if you don't mind some of the ignorance that comes along with this type of analysis, which I'll make it clear what that is. Let's talk about safety. I want you to think for a minute. God darn it, I got to do something. What do you think is the most, it's so weird how it's affecting my behavior, just punishing, like I'm going to be standing like this. What do you think? How do you get safety? When you do an analysis, you're taking on risk. You're knowingly putting a child in a provocative, evocative situation to evoke behavior, hoping that the interview illuminated the proper reinforcer so you can turn it off. You're assuming risk. How do you maintain safety in an analysis? I want you to think about that. When people have talked about safety in the most recent book chapters, it starts out with things like padded rooms, nurses, a team-based approach, protective equipment for the child, protective equipment for the staff. To me, those are not safety procedures. Those are the shite already hit the fan procedures. It's already unsafe. Safety is found in the design of the analysis and a couple other features. What I mean by the design of the analysis is safety can be found in the immediate delivery of all suspected reinforcers for all members of the response class. So let's take it the other way. The way to create an unsafe analysis is to put a child in a evocative situation and not provide reinforcement. That was a popular model in the mid-'80s. Not done much anymore, thank goodness. That's unsafe. To put a child in an evocative context and not be poised to reinforce, you're going to get escalation. If you delay the reinforcers, that's not unsafe, because what a kid's going to fill the delay with? Behavior. And it's not going to go from whining to reading the Bible. It's going to go from whining to hitting themselves, so on and so forth. You can't be a cool cucumber in the analysis. So I have some new grad students that are just too cool for school, and they're just, they're not, they don't know the group yet, and so they're cool. And so they're in the analysis, and the child is problem behavior, and they're kind of slow to react because that's who they are. No, you leave who you are at the door. You're fast, is what you are now. You're comically fast. The behavior happens, you're like, whoa, it's no problem. We can do things your way. Fast, immediate delivery of the reinforcer, that's where safety comes in, number one. Number two, of all suspected reinforcers, if problem behavior is maintained by escape to the iPad, just to be simple, and you only provide escaping, you don't provide the iPad, they may continue to engage in problem behavior. That's unsafe. If you deliver all the suspected reinforcers, you're likely to get the full termination or turn off of the behavior. That's where safety comes from. And then finally, if you're not willing to reinforce all members of the response class, you may get escalation into a zone where the behavior is no longer operant, but it's an operant behavior and an emotional response. This is hard to talk about in our journals, and so I'm talking about it here, but I'll try to get it in there. But you know what I'm talking about, I think, if you've done these sort of things. So it goes like this. If a child has a typical escalation like that boy we saw in the video, they mumble, they start by mumbling, then they kind of physically resist, and then there's a little whining, and then there's a jump up and down, show, tantrum, flop on the couch, and then there's the hitting, and then there's the self-injury, which that boy engaged in self-injury, but he didn't get there with his pretest. If you're saying, oh, I'm only going to reinforce self-injury because I need to do a functional analysis of self-injury, I'm charged with understanding why self-injury is occurring, i.e. I'm going to do a low inference analysis, and you ignore the whining, the flopping, the faux slapping at you, and all that's going on, those what we call sub-criterion responses, you're not reinforcing them, and you wait until you see self-injury. Well, by the time they get there, they may also be crying and flush and ticked off, and their heart's racing. And you may provide all the reinforcers immediately, but that behavior will not turn off because it's no longer merely an operant. It's an emotional response too, and once it becomes part of an emotional response, you may not be able to turn it off with mere reinforcement. Just think about little babies. Some moms, and this is not, don't feel bad if you can't do this, my wife does studies on this, most moms can't tell the different cries, and Catherine Ladowski, and she's at this conference, talk to her about it, she's expert in it, but some parents can detect the cries, right? They know, this cry means they're hungry, this cry means they need to take a nap. Now if you get them, baby, at that little early cry, you might be able to turn that cry off quite quickly with the proper reinforcer. But if you let that baby get worked up, there's no way. You could provide the food, the comfort, the nap space, and that's not going anywhere. It's the same things for older learners. Once they cross that emotional threshold, you can't necessarily turn it off. That's a long story pointing to, if you want a safe analysis, you have to reinforce early. The first response, hit it with the reinforcer. If you're not sure, you have 5 responses you go into the analysis with, but they give you a 6th, reinforce it. Do you see what I'm saying? Your code going into analysis is a good guess based on an interview. Trust the process. Walk out of the room, go, oh, did they finger bite? You didn't tell me about finger bite. Yeah, they do that all the time. Thank you. Okay? Because if you wait for the target behavior to occur, you may get uncontrolled escalation, and you may teach people in that school that functional analyses are not to be done here. And please know that that happens a lot in our profession. Okay. What are some other safety tactics? Body position. We try to teach an analysis, so let me tell you what I mean by that. If the child's right-handed, I will generally present the EO on their left side, so I have a little more time to react. Second, when I'm presenting the EO, I stand in an authoritative position to kind of make it clear it's on. I also stand like this, not because I'm in a thinking pose, I'm in a protect my stuff pose. Okay, so it's like, oh, okay, put that iPad away, let's get some work done, I'm ready, I got my side to them, I'm ready to protect. As soon as there's a problem behavior, I'm like, no problem, let's do your way. Now I'm down on this level. Am I okay being down on this level for safety? Yes, I am, because it's reinforcement time. They're not likely to have a problem then. And I signal to them it's safe. Let's go. I signal to them it's time to behave. I signal to them it's time to not behave. Again, safety is in the design of the analysis. Body position, to me, is a critical way to get tight control of behavior in your analysis. And then finally, lastly, people get hurt sometimes in analyses. And I think it's partly because they don't think they have the authority to say, enough, we need to end this. And so this is our policy in our consults in our clinic. Anyone can terminate the analysis at any time. If the janitor walks by the cafeteria, we're doing it in the school, in the cafeteria, and the janitor goes, what are you doing? We're like, we're done. Let's talk. Even a question about it that it seems like, that's weird, why are you doing that with that kid? We're going to stop. We're going to educate. We're going to make sure everyone's on board. If the analyst doesn't like the situation, they're scared, it doesn't seem proper, end it. I'm going to let you in a little secret. We have a new process called the enhanced choice model. The client, the child, can end the analysis at any time. They can walk out, and we let them. Everyone should have the authority to terminate the process. If it's designed properly, no one will want to terminate the process. Okay. I'm going to show you some examples now. This is a little guy. He's not diagnosed with autism. We have a free clinic. Our consults aren't free, but our clinic is free. We see a lot of kids in the clinic that fall through the cracks because they don't have the right diagnosis to get services, but they got problem behavior and the parents are worried for him. This is one of those guys, very little guy, no diagnosis, but he has pretty good problem behavior. In these videos, you're not going to see severe problem behavior because of the design of the analysis. Those are the results. That's what a typical ISCA looks like. Control, test, control, test, test. Why do they look like that? That's the minimal unit of functional control. A, B, and I do an extra test because 3 points makes a line. Some people get really weirded out there's not another open circle there. I get it. Aesthetically, it's like, man, you're leaving me hanging. But from an experimental design standpoint, it's not necessary. And if you review for some journals, please listen to that. I have a little blurb I just stick in my response letters about functional control. There's functional control there. Okay? That's this boy's analysis. So this is the control condition. Remember, the control is going to get all the suspected reinforcers. Here are suspected reinforcers: escape, the tangibles, attention, and man compliance. Let's talk about man compliance real quick. If you haven't heard of man compliance, I want you to understand that this is a very prominent controlling contingency for problem behavior. It's not new. Lynn Bowman, Wayne Fisher, and Rachel Thompson. Rachel Thompson's my wife. They published on this in 1997. It's called Compliance with Mans as the Reinforcer for Problem Behavior. It looks like this. A child with autism, or any child, might say, Mommy, I want you to do this. And the mom acquiesces. Of course, and everything's fine. Mommy, I want you to do that. Everything's fine. Mommy, I want you to sit in that chair. Lovely, I'll sit in that chair. Mommy, I want you to sit on Daddy's lap during dinner. I'm not going to do that, son. That's weird. Okay. They sit on Dad's lap during dinner. Now, they may not do that when they're 3, but when they're 13 and they're hurting themselves, parents engage in extraordinary compliance with their child's request to keep the peace. So it's called man compliance. It's a dynamic contingency. It's not attention. It's not escape. It's not stuff. It's not sensory. It doesn't fit tidily in those boxes. So please understand that main theme. Qualitatively rich reinforcers are controlling problem behavior. If you aren't looking for them, you won't see them. Don't be constrained by our simplistic language system. Compliance with MANS is probably a reinforcer for every kid with problem behavior who has language. I don't meet kids with problem behavior who don't ask for something, get denied, and don't get ticked. That's a universal. And ticked results in problem behavior for the kids that get referred to the clinic. Okay? Here's another assumption. I said it yesterday, and I used to not say these things. I just thought them, but kept them to myself and maybe a few students. I believe that all problem behavior is multiply controlled. I believe that most problem behavior is controlled by escape, two tangibles, and attention, and man compliance, and some sensory preferred context. So that makes our job a little weird, doesn't it? Does that put us out of a job? If it's all maintained by all those things, what's our job? Our job isn't to check the box of which one, for me. Our job is to figure out what are the personal details in each of those categories. What type of attention? What are they escaping from? What are they escaping to? What are they manding for? What are the contexts in which mans are lit up? It's about UNO. It's about zipping up backpacks. Do you see what I'm saying? It gets very personal. And that's why you need the open-ended interview to personalize those categories, okay? So this boy has a traditional synthesized contingency. This is the control condition. We give parents choice. It goes like this. Our model, just a quick aside, it goes like this. If the child doesn't have severe problem behavior, we try to do home-based, and we try to do a prevention curriculum where parents implement and we support. If problem behavior exists with regularity and it's fairly unmanageable, we have a process where we do the ISCA, the interview, then the analysis, and then we do the skill-based treatment where we do it, either in the home or the clinic. We do the teaching. However, in that model, we give the parents another choice. Do you want to watch and we'll do the heavy lifting, the teaching and all that, or do you want to participate? Do you want to do it and we'll coach you? Most parents don't want to do it when the child has existing levels of problem behavior. Okay, they want to watch. Please understand there's no third option where we will take your child and you go to Target and come back in an hour. There is no option when we go to your house and we work with your child in a basement while you do something else. This is a collaborative approach. If you're not there, we're not there. We need you. We're going to leave. You have to do this. Eventually you have to do this. So we can wait until we get a fancy pants treatment and try to train you on it, or we can go along the way with you collaboratively. You can give us feedback on it, and when all said and done, you understand that treatment as well as we do because you developed it with us. That's our model. Whether we're in a clinic or we're in a home, the parents are with us. If we're in a school, the teacher or the para is with us. We don't do any work in the absence of a relevant person. In this case, mom elected to be in the room, part of the reinforcement interval, but not do the analysis. The analyst is a gentleman named Adityan, or Ditu for short.
He's the button.
Oh no, he bite me out. It's a scary snake, man, and a scary beetle.
Boring. That's what a control condition should be. Boring.
There it is.
Cute. Should be cute, too.
Where is it? Oh, there it is. I thought we lost that red car.
Okay. Does that look cumbersome? Some people see these synthesized continuously like, whoa, how am I going to wield all these reinforcers? This is out of control. Killing me. Escape. Do you see it? The parent, nor Ditu, is imposing their will. There's no instructions. That's escape. Okay. What's the other words there? Tangibles. See all that stuff on the floor? That's not clinic toys. That's his toys. Parents bring in, or they give us a list and we buy them. We emulate the home environment. There's the tangibles. Attention. Attention isn't this. Child steps in the room, we go, hey, I like your shirt, I like your green shirt, I like Adidas, what does Adidas stand for? Every day, something about soccer. Okay, and then that's soccer, and then, oh, do you like the Mets? I like, oh, the Mets are horrible this year. You hear this therapy? That's how we used to give attention to kids, just like verbal diarrhea. Shouldn't say diarrhea this early in the morning. But anyways, we already talked about GI issues, so we crossed that bridge. The point is our attention looks like this. We follow the child's lead. We look for an indicator that they want to interact with us, and then we provide attention. Good teachers, good people, you know this stuff, okay? But don't feel like in the name of science you have to give attention on a 30-second schedule, or you have to give attention every second to make it continuous. That's how we used to do it, and I'm being silly about it because it's silly. It is silly. How about this? Be normal. I bet if you're normal, it'll be right. Follow the child's lead. If they try to play hide and seek with the toy, don't ignore them because of some, I don't know, protocol. Go, oh, you're hiding the toy. And he goes, "Rrr." Go, oh, that is scary. Follow their lead. Okay, that's how we give attention. Man compliance, when the child makes a request or indicates something, Ditu's trying to follow through. It's not unwieldy. When you synthesize reinforcers, it actually is a natural interaction. We are emulating natural interactions. That's what it looks like. So let's get to the test.
Oh no. Alright, I actually need this. I need you to go over there and clean up those blocks, okay?
Okay.
How cute. Oh my God, with the little muscle man.
Okay, stop cleaning. I need you to watch. Go play on the iPad.
No.
He's the
Go
only
play on
one
the
in
iPad by
America.
yourself.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to play with these toys? Oh, sure. We can do that.
He fell
You
down.
did fall down. But you know what? We're done with these toys. I need you to go play with the iPad over there. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to keep playing with these toys?
Yeah.
Sure. Here you go. Here. All right. Yay!
Like a faucet. Okay. Again, the synthesized contingency is not cumbersome. It's simply, at the end of 30 seconds, he starts to impose his will. Like, well, stop doing what you're doing. Let's go clean up. When the child engages in problem behavior, Ditu tries to signal clearly that, okay, we'll have none of that. We can do things your way. You can have your stuff. I'll attend to you, and we'll do what you ask you to do. That results in that graph. Those 3 test points are now our baseline. After lunch, we'll talk about what we do from that baseline. We build skills in the same context. We don't role play. Even if we're dealing with older kids with high IQs, it's not role play. We put them in an authentically charged situation, and then we teach in that situation. And we think when we teach skills when the emotion's real, we're more likely to get generality to those easier conditions, okay? And you'll see what I mean as we go. This boy, we also have a consult model, so we consult in different schools. This is a specialized school serving kids with autism. This boy is very difficult to teach. He hasn't passed an IEP goal in a long time because he engages in fairly severe self-injury and aggression. And you're not going to see that because my mission is to never see those behaviors in my analysis. I like to tell people that the safest place for your child is in our analysis. Okay? And so what you're going to see first is the control condition.
It's time to play ball. The rocks. Bat first. He waits for his turn. The better. It's the most.
Okay, I want you to notice a few things. Notice how sloppy it looks. We got stuff everywhere. Analyses look like slop because we have all the kids' potential reinforcers in that space. I never want to hear the term, well, that point's aberrant because they were trying to get out of the room to go get the Funyuns that were down the hall. Put the damn Funyuns in the room. Put whatever you need to put in the room that might motivate the child that people have used to redirect kids from behavior. As far as Funyuns go, not just because they're terribly disgusting, but I try not to put any food in analyses. So I will say we've made some mistakes by trying to remove food from analyses, but sometimes we put them in. Notice, too, that this is the child's teacher. This isn't one of my teammates. Okay, this is his teacher. You notice I didn't do the analysis, and my colleagues didn't do the analysis. It would be weird for me to take that young boy, that older boy, and put him in my lap. Right? Would it not? A stranger just sticking that boy in my lap and going, "Hey, boo!" I don't even know what she's saying or why she's saying it that way. I like to use people to have a relationship with the child, especially kids with autism that like books read particular ways and they like to sing particular songs, and when they look at you, that means finger tickle. How the hell would I know that? So I need people who have an authentic relationship sometimes with the child doing the analysis. And it's not hard for them to do the analysis because the analysis is based on the stories they tell us. So there's not a lot of training. So again, this is his teacher providing him with these reinforcers. No instruction, full access to her attention. That's pretty unique forms of attention, the way she's holding on and talking to him. And he has particular books. That's his main thing he likes to do. You'll see now the test session. Now, this boy has very severe problem behavior, and you got to kind of trust me. You're not going to see it. What you're going to see is what we call business-type relationship. It's on reinforcement.
Okay. All right. Let's do some more handwriting. Sit back.
That's it. Now I'll show you some videos where we closed the contingency class down, where we had a low inference analysis, and you'll see the difference. When you open the contingency class, it settles down into a manageable type of situation. Again, why do we do an analysis? I want to keep putting down this point. You might want to write, if you write anything down today, maybe it's the safety slide and this slide. Oh, you have access to the slides. Why do we do an analysis? This is not the stuff of research only. And to me, this is not also just a clinical analysis. We do this in research. We're trying to understand behavior and its controlling contingencies with combined contingencies. Okay, it's just a different level of reductionism. Why do we do the analysis in practice? You want to demonstrate that the hunch has some veracity. It actually controls behavior. Second, you want to get a baseline. Those 3 data points are your baseline from which to evaluate whether your treatment is maintaining a reduction from it. And then third, and perhaps most important, you want to have a motivating context to teach skills. You ever seen a speech-language pathologist charged with teaching a child to mand? It's an awkward start. You ever see a BCBA trying to teach a child to request a break? That's an awkward start. What do I do? How do I motivate them? Oh, do this work. No, say break. Okay, you don't have to. Okay, let's do that again. Yeah, do this work. Just say break. Break. Okay, you don't have to. Is the fire burning? Maybe that kid wants to do the work. A lot of times when I see people teach break response, the kid's like, I don't want to break. I want to actually do the math. Because you don't have a properly motivating set of conditions to teach demand. If a child's willing to run across the room and slap their sister and put their head through the wall, they're motivated. It's not a surprise that we can teach a mand in 5 to 20 minutes. FCT is not a quarterly goal. FCT is an hourly goal. You should be able to get a mand off the ground in an hour. You can get that if you start with a fire. The motivation is burning the brightest, and that's where severe problem behavior lives. So this is not merely, let's try to manage problem behavior. When kids engage in severe problem behavior, and if you come back after lunch, even chronic levels of stereotypy, they're motivated. That's what that tells me. They are motivated. And now we have to construct a teaching context around that motivation to get life skills off the ground. Skills that protect kids from further problem behavior, which is communication, toleration, and compliance, or contextually appropriate behavior. Okay, so this is not a functional assessment process to merely figure out why, to merely manage behavior. It's about coming up with a teaching context, okay? When you come back, I'm going to show you a few more videos about why and you want to open that contingency class. I'll talk about some of the evidence for the utility of this approach, and then we'll have opportunities for Q&A. It's 10:17. I'm sorry to be so damn cheap, but we're going to start again at 10:30, so we only get a 12.5-minute break. Sorry. See you then. If you look at the results of this analysis, well, let's take a little side turn while people are walking in. People often say, but that is good. Yeah, it's neat, but it's not a functional analysis, because a functional analysis is a process where you identify whether it's A, B, or C, or D, that sort of thing. No one's defined functional analysis like that in a peer-reviewed journal that I can find. So let me give you the definition of functional analysis that you'll see emulated in chapters, decent chapters, but certainly the peer-reviewed literature. A functional analysis involves direct observation of problem behavior under at least 2 conditions. Functional analysis involves direct observation of problem behavior under at least 2 conditions as an attempt to understand why problem behavior is occurring. That's a functional analysis. This is a functional analysis. It's a type of analysis. It's different than a standard or traditional analysis, very much so. But it is a functional analysis, and please don't let people move you off that mark. It meets the criteria of a functional analysis, okay? Okay. If you look at this, whenever we show these graphs, it's what we call aggregated. You don't know what response topography occurred. And so what I'm going to show you now, if you look, it's kind of hard to see, but this is each topography that occurred and was reported separated out into its own panel. If I go back to this graph, This is the first phase of the graph I'm going to turn to now. And this is the differentiated analysis. Behavior is turned on and off across the control and test. The first 5 sessions is now unpacked into its 5 topographies. You'll notice that vocal disruptions was the primary topography. We had parents and teachers self-select kids for what we call a consecutive controlled case series design. A consecutive controlled case series design is a new method that I really like that Lou Agopian really made popular for Kennedy Krieger Institute. What it is it addresses what's called the file draw problem. In single subject research, when things look lovely, they get published. When things look not so lovely, they go into a file draw. So we have a false impression about the probability something will work when you look at the literature and merely review the literature, because the things that didn't work went to the file cabinet. It's not tomfoolery, it's just the progression of science, so we have a probability issue. In other words, I want you to think about this. When you see an article in Java, and I love Java, when you see an article in Java, what you should think is, oh, that's possible. But please know that you have no idea whether it is probable, whether it is likely to look that way when you try that same thing. And that's now a new opportunity for us in the fields. So one way to answer that, to fill that gap between what's possible and what's probable is this thing called a consecutive control case series design. And all that means is you register all your participants at the front end of your study and you report all the data. In this, parents or teachers self-selected their kids for a study where we're going to ask the question, is the behavior that occurred in the initial ISCA, is the controlling contingency for that behavior also controlling their most dangerous behavior? We're going to go through a process to determine that. Said another way, we're going to see if these are members of the same response class, sensitive to the same reinforcer. Okay. The results for all 10 consecutive cases were the same. The answer is yes. If you know the reinforcer for the mild behavior that you see first, it is the same reinforcer as the dangerous behavior. And there's examples of this outside the ISCA process that support that notion as well. Okay? When people report behaviors co-occur in the same situation, they tend to be reinforced or strengthened by the same contingency. But there's practical implications. I want you to see them. So when we're poised to reinforce all suspected members of the response class, those data are boxed in green. I'm going to show you what the analysis looks like for a little boy named, fake named Luke.
And that's a little thing, you know, right? But when he opens the cage all day...
Alright, let's clean up.
No! Okay. Like I said it! Silly. I told you that.
I told you that.
About doing that.
So we do some wrinkles on procedures for kids who have good language to deal with reactivity. I don't like people languaging into the reinforcement interval like he was doing. It usually goes away. If it doesn't, we stretch out reinforcement intervals or we run it under more natural conditions or with parents. Nevertheless, that's what it looks like with the open contingency. She's poised to reinforce any of the reported members. This is what it looks like when we put all reported members on extinction except the main problem, which was throwing toys. This boy was very good at throwing. It's like he went to Cal Ripken camp and he would honk very hard toys off his grandma and his mom's face. And also the therapist should have been more safe in this, but so please know that that model is not optimal. But here's when we close the continuous class and what it looks like.
Actually, not that long, so actually, when I do those things on my work, so this is how it goes.
Alright, I need you to help.
No!
Okay, you don't have to.
I told you that a minute ago.
Now with a boy like Luke, it's cute. He's funny as hell, to be honest. It's cute. But when someone's 6'2", it's not cute when you do a low inference analysis and they have to escalate to produce that outcome, and that reinforcement may not turn off that behavior. And this is why we emphasize repeatedly to consider an open contingency class and hazarding that inferential leap that if you know what the reinforcer is for the vocal disruptive behavior, it's probably the reinforcer for the aggressive, self-injurious, what have you, topography. Here's another example with a boy in a consult. So this is a specialized school. This is a therapy room that they've constructed for this process. And I'm going to show you what it looks like with a closed contingency class first. So this graph shows a progressive extinction analysis. Every time a new topography appeared, that would go on extinction, and we'd see another one come up, and then that would go on extinction. And you can see the graph, it's pretty systematic. As systematic extinctions applied, response class members emerge, and we learn that all these responses are in the same class. Why are we doing this? Because the people we're consulting with were not satisfied merely knowing that his foot stomping behavior was controlled by this contingency. They wanted to know if his SIB was controlled by that contingency. Okay? Now we don't acquiesce. We say we have 10 consecutive cases, it's always the same. So let's not do this anymore. So I'm not suggesting you do this, but I want you to see the implications of your choices. This is a closed contingency. We're waiting for the SIB.
Okay, we've got to get back to work. Stand up, please. Sorry, the rug is all done.
These are what we call sub-criteria responses. Unfortunately, studies don't show these. It looks all tidy, just the SIB, but there's a whole lot of behavior going on that's not reported. And that behavior can get you in hot water depending on the situation you're being analytic in. This is not something, for instance, you'd want to do in a public school classroom. It was very subtle. He engaged in a headbang against her kneecap, and that yielded the reinforcement. So that's the closed contingency. Here's the same boy when the contingency is open. She's poised to reinforce all reported members of problem behavior. Again, these are not all problem behaviors. These are problem behaviors that are reported to co-occur in the same situation, so please know that. This is subtle. You might miss it. So subtle. She's on reinforcement right now.
Great. We got to clean up. Can we get back to work? Oh, you can back to work.
Then he went, stomped his foot. Okay, that's what I mean by the business-style relationship. That emerges when you have immediate reinforcement of all suspected members of the response class with all suspected reinforcers. It looks like that. That's why I'm okay doing analyses wherever, with whomever. I'm going to talk about Jeffrey now. Jeffrey was a 9-year-old boy. He was not on the spectrum. He had other diagnoses. He was very smart, spoke with sophistication. He had the police show up to his school with some sort of regularity because he would run away from school. He would do other behaviors, touch people inappropriate and things of that nature when he had his meltdowns in school. You don't have to have autism to have meltdowns. And so he had a lot of police escorts, and the school was kind of fed up, and he wasn't going to be able to go back to the school. But we weren't working for the school, we were working for the family in the free clinic, and so this was done in the clinic. Now, what I'm going to show you is a problem. Now, that analysis looks just like the other ones. It's pretty good. We're ready to go. But what it looked like in the first test session was not something I would want to put on the evening news. It's not something, it wasn't that bad, I'm going to show it to you, but it just wasn't great. Jeffrey was a guy that inspired a new way for us to do the process. It's called the enhanced choice process, where we give kids the opportunity to leave anytime. And they basically can go to another room that's essentially the control condition. So from a child's perspective, it's a choice between I can go into the contingent reinforcement room or I can go into the non-contingent reinforcement room. And they can move between them, or they can leave at any time, take their parent and go home. And but let me show it to you first, the impetus for this different model, then I'll articulate that model later. So this was the control session, and just so you get to know what this guy's about. It's a typical synthesized contingency.
Yep. Well, we're going again, or what?
Yeah! Let me just play this minigame balloon break.
Sure thing.
It's like the most annoying one because, oh, I've never seen this background before. Can you just keep on clicking A for me?
Sure. Like fast?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Thank you. You're gonna give me a lot of points.
Oh, John.
Okay. So that's what a synthesized contingency looks like. You're just following his lead. You want me to cheat on the game with you? You bet. We're not breaking laws, but we just follow the kid's lead. Okay. So everything's lovely. Now, Dittu put the EO in place. Basically said, okay, let's put your games away and let's get some work done. We learned through the interview that certain work tend to evoke the problem behavior and the elopement and all that. And so Dittu, with the video I'm going to show you now, he's in the test session. It's one of the early ones, and the boy's pouting. So he provided reinforcement. The boy was just ticked off that Dittu had the audacity to, impose his will on him, and he's just mad. But then it escalates. So he's on reinforcement. He's pouting in the
Cool.
corner.
All right. Hey, thanks for taking a little break.
Dad's watching from
You
the
gotta get
one-way
back to
mirror.
work now, though.
I'm not even gonna use it. I'm just lying here.
All right. I need you to come sit in this chair, though.
He's putting the EO back in place.
Come sit right here. Oh, dude, you don't have to do work.
He's trying to signal that reinforcement's available, but the boy's having none of it. He's done. He's trying to pinch, scratch, leave the room, calling for his father. That's dangerous.
So, you can hang out
Fast
here,
slamming
do
of the
whatever you
door.
like. Oh.
Now, Dittu's
Do you
doing
want me to just,
everything
like, turn
right
around?
as far as our
Don't
policy
talk
goes.
to me.
Don't talk to me. So we don't talk a lot about this, the therapeutic relationship. But when you're dealing with language-able kids, understand it has some meaning. And there's something about starting out that therapeutic relationship wrestling with kids and overly managing and controlling them. And there's something about maybe putting this on the evening news, and maybe people wouldn't want our therapy for their kids, even though we know they may benefit from it. And so that's what occasioned my group to reconsider our process. And so we have a new process that's a hands-off process. It's called the choice model. And kids choose, they elect to come down into the therapeutic space. They choose their materials to go in. We put some materials in there. They're told they can leave at any time to go into the other room and take all their stuff with them, and we'll go and give them non-contingent attention and all that. They can go hang out with their parents. They can use the restroom when they want, or they can just go home. And I'll show you what this afternoon, the process, but kids basically get through the same process and we get the same outcomes without handling kids and without overly controlling them in the process. I just want you to show, this is 15 minutes later, so it turned into a business-style relationship despite our bad engineering.
I don't want to do any of these things right now, because we gotta get work done. So, here you go. Oh, dude. Why didn't you just say so? Sure, we can keep playing. I'm sorry about that.
Listen.
Are you doing this on purpose now?
Dittu said, doing what on purpose? And the boy said, driving me crazy. So we still have work to do to try to get the reactivity out of it. Again, what we generally do is we try to naturalize the space. We try to space out the reinforcers. Some kids time when the EO is going to happen, so they're like second 27, 28 on reinforcement. They kind of look at me and say, don't you dare take my iPod. So they kind of have some kind of temporal discrimination. So we try to just naturalize it ever so slightly to get the language to go away. Again, these are the methodological parts of the process that are important. Why does it work? Does it work? What's the extent to which it'll be probably working for you? And so let's just talk about that. To me, the most important aspect of the approach is interview informed. There's nothing generic. Every functional analysis may be described the same on our published graphs. Escape, the tangibles, attention, and man compliance. So people just say, they denigrate and call it the kitchen sink approach. You just throw in reinforcers at kids, and that's just not the case. The categories are indeed the same, because my assumption is most problem behavior is maintained by those categories of behavior. What's different are the details. I showed you multiple examples where those analyses look very different, and they're based on the interview. That's what gives the qualitative difference to them. The other part is the synthesis, and I want to talk a little bit about synthesis if I could, and then we'll go back to questions about how to apply it. This is, I saw this in practice for a time, but I was working on sleep and other things, and so we weren't doing functional assessment research. But once we opened the clinic, this was the first client. And this was that girl, the little Latina girl. Her analysis wasn't as tidy as I showed you. It actually is this, okay? And I want to walk through this because it makes a very important point. If you look at the first panel, the top panel, we tried to have the analyst do the analysis without the mom. And you'll notice in the test session we had no problem behavior. When Nick took his attention away from the girl and put her toys up, we just had crummy clinic toys for her, she just looked at him and like batted her eyelashes. She just made cute faces at him. And so understand, sometimes our ISCAs fail, and they often fail because we have an irrelevant person doing the analysis, and that failure probability goes up with very young children. Young kids really need parents or teachers doing the analysis. They need that authentic person, so please understand that take-home point. But I'm not showing you this graph for that reason. I'm showing it to you for the second dependency. In other words, the contingency influencing her behavior is dependent on, first, her mother delivering it. So that's what that top panel shows. When the mother delivered it, we showed sensitivity to the contingency. When the analyst, we got nothing, the mother. So that's a condition where we know mom's going to need to do the treatment process with us. But the grad students at the time were like, yeah, but is her behavior maintained by tangibles or attention? And I said, it doesn't matter. We can treat despite not knowing that. And they said, well, but we need to publish these things. And I said, well, then it may matter. But we're going to try to get through it regardless. But I acquiesced. I often do when the grad students have their ideas. And so I said, okay, let's test it. And if you look at the second panel, that's where we assessed to see if her behavior was exclusively maintained by tangible items with both the analyst and then the mom. And you notice there's no differentiation. Her behavior was not sensitive to tangibles when presented alone. Then when you look at the third panel, it's attention, and her behavior was not sensitive to attention when isolated. This is not a paradox, but it seems like one. Her behavior is neither maintained by tangibles nor attention, but it is maintained by both. How is that possible? It's possible through a concept called an interaction. An interaction is something where one thing depends on the presence of another thing. Said better here, it's when the effect of one contingency depends on the presence of the other contingency. It can either be parked in the EO part of the contingency or in the reinforcer part of the contingency. For this young lady, it was in the EO. What I mean by that is this. When she had mommy love but didn't have access to preferred toys, she was fine. When she had her preferred toys and didn't have mommy love, she was fine. When she didn't have her preferred toys or mommy love, she melted down. The synthesis of the EOs was necessary to evoke the behavior. For we've seen this effect with many other children. For the other children, it's more parked in the consequence land. For some kids, attention is not that valuable unless the toys are there. And toys are not reinforcing unless there's someone to play with. Escape to nothing is not reinforcing. Some toys aren't that reinforcing. But the toys are reinforcing when the alternative is to work. And work is more heinous when there's toys to play with. Those are interactions, and those are everywhere. And despite the fact that they're not prominent in the literature, they're only not prominent in the literature because our methodology did not reveal them, because our language system didn't allow us to talk about them or see them. But now that we are looking for them, they are everywhere. Sometimes when we do comparative analyses and we take the synthesized contingency and we break apart its components, we see control by the components. This is an example we call a match. The synthesized contingency controlled behavior. The isolated components of that contingency also controlled behavior when separate. We see this match about 1/3 of the time. 2/3 of the time, we see this. The synthesized contingency, evident in the first column for 3 participants, we see control over behavior. When we take the same exact contingencies and isolate them into their own conditions, we see no control by those same contingencies. The take-home point here is that whole reinforcement contingencies have properties that cannot be found in the parts of the contingencies. This is called holism. Holism is not like scented candles and massage oils only. Yeah, that's some holism. Holism is a scientific construct. It means, again, some things aren't operating unless they're together. Sometimes contingencies, their parts work. Standard analyses are differentiated at the Kennedy Krieger Institute 47% of the time, meaning 53% of the time they're not at the best place on earth, presumably, to do a standard analysis where we isolate contingencies. What's going on there, I believe, is that if we were to put those things together, we'd control behavior. Okay. I want to make it clear, too, that we've discovered nothing. That synthesized contingencies have been controlling behavior in the literature for years. We just haven't had language to talk about them. We've talked about them just structurally. This is a short list of studies that have elegant comparative single-subject designs where the isolated contingency did not control behavior, but when they combined those same isolates, they showed control over behavior. This is not a short list, and I'm sure there's more. It's hard to find these studies because there's no key words for them. This is from the same review paper that will be published in JABA this year. This is treatment. Each bar represents a child's behavior reduction. If the bar is gray, that's the reduction when the reinforcers were synthesized or combined. If the bar is white, that's the treatment reduction when the reinforcers were isolated. Each child has both a gray and white bar because they were in adequately controlled comparative analyses. What you'll see is that the gray bars always have a higher effect size than the white bars, with the one exception where they both had a strong effect. We can't find a single case where isolated reinforcers are more powerful in treating behavior than the combined reinforcers. 80% reduction is achieved 81% of the time with the synthesized contingency. It's achieved but 12% of the time with an isolated contingency. Now, these numbers are stacked towards synthesis because presumably these kids were in the study because the isolated contingency didn't work. Isolated contingencies clearly work more than 12% of the time. Okay. But my point is this. I can't find an example where the isolated reinforcer works better than the synthesized one. I think we'll find it eventually, but the fact that I have to work so hard to find it drives me very hard towards combining the reinforcers because it gives me a fast outcome in an analysis and it gives stronger treatment outcomes in the literature, and I'll show you our treatment outcomes and others this afternoon. These are non-comparative effects of synthesized contingencies. Each bar represents a child in a peer-reviewed study. Most of these bars are well above 80%. Combined contingencies work. I'm going to show you this comparison. I have some very good colleagues who've decided to do some of these comparative analyses too. Unfortunately, I think they have stopped short. What I mean by that is they compare isolated to synthesized contingencies, and when there's a disagreement, they say, well, the isolated contingency one is right because that's the gold standard. It's been around longer. I don't think truth can be found that way. I hope you don't either. Truth can be found in effective action. So if I have two analyses that disagree, what we do then is we put treatment in both of those analyses off those baselines, and we see which one yields the better treatment outcome the quickest. So I'm going to show you some data from that. So we have two participants here. The top row are Emily's data. The bottom row are Jeff's data. The first column is the ISCA-based treatment. So let's look at Emily. Emily, the combined contingency was escape, the tangibles, and attention. She learned a communication response within 15 minutes to the exclusion of problem behavior. Problem behavior was down to 0 in 15 minutes. If you look over now at her standard-based treatment, she never acquired the communication response and problem behavior persisted. Again, these are kids for whom they had an isolated analysis and a combined analysis both yield control over behavior. They just pointed to different hypotheses. Let's look at Jeff's When Jeff could escape the tangibles, he learned to communicate within 10 to 15 minutes to the exclusion of problem behavior. The standard analysis showed control by attention. He never acquired the response, and problem behavior persisted. Okay? So yeah, you're going to get differences. The point is this. These are great colleagues of mine, but I have strong disagreement. I don't think you should try to take your combined contingencies and figure out which one, because you can't. Because you can't know that. Because when you isolate, it's not the same as when it's combined. That's the point of holism. Whole things have properties that can't be found in the parts. Maybe we need to get over it. That we're not going to know whether it's attention or tangibles or escape, because we can't. Please know that running a simple, let me run an attention test. Look, behavior's not sensitive to attention. I guess attention's irrelevant. That's bad science. Science doesn't allow you to rule out reinforcers with a mere test. Science is good at ruling in. It's piss poor at ruling out. Let's not be confident in ruling out reinforcers based on simple tests. I would rather make the mistake of including the reinforcers. Because if I make the mistake of including the reinforcers, I'm going to merely teach that kid to demand and handle not having that reinforcer in my therapeutic process, and I like that. If I was wrong, we'll call it prevention. But if I'm wrong and not include the right reinforcers, I may have an unsafe treatment that doesn't work. And that's not something I'm willing to risk. So this is not, synthesis is good for clinical stuff, but the real science can be found in, no. It's actually, I think we need to acknowledge that there's some not so good science going on in the name of functional analysis. And we need to start calling it what it is. Okay. Does this stuff work? It does work. First, this was in 2016. These are 25 kids. These are babies, 12 months old, 18 months old. These are adults, 35-year-olds. This is group homes. This is clinic. This is public school. This is specialized school. We get differentiated outcome in 3 out of 4 cases the first time. 1 out of 4, we fail. When we fail, it's often because we have an inauthentic person in there. Sometimes we fail because we have the contingency wrong. Sometimes the interview's wrong. Yes, it's subjective. It's a good guess. That's why the analysis is so important, because it teaches you whether you're right or wrong, and then you can correct it. How do you correct it? Make sure the parent or teacher is with you. Turn to them and say, what are we not doing right? Oh, the way you're prompting, we don't prompt that way. We don't. Okay. When we don't get it right, it's because we're not emulating the conditions properly, and the only way I can know that is if an authentic person is with me in the process. That's why we have that policy. Okay. But eventually, they look like this. And they look like this the first time most of the time. This is one we're poised to publish this year in BAP. The difference here, these are 50 consecutive cases. Not a single case is thrown out. My point is we get differentiated results in 50 consecutive cases. I give my students another assignment. I say, show me one study where the starting point was a standard analysis, or analysis where the contingencies were isolated and the end point is a socially valid or meaningful outcome. There's one study. In our history of doing functional analysis, which is 35 years, or arguably 50 years since Lovas did one, we have one study showing a teacher saying, yes, I'm satisfied with the improvement in problem behavior. That was a trial-based analysis done by my good colleague Jen Austin, and she'll be the first to admit that those reinforcers were synthesized. She did in a public school classroom. There is no isolating peer attention and all that from those conditions. Maybe it wasn't clearly articulated in the article, but it's obvious. By contrast, we get parents saying, thank you, problem solved, when they're implementing it all day in their homes, and teachers saying the same things. People think we have some special sauce. We don't. I'm not that good a clinician. You can imagine how rough I am sometimes with people. I'm so impulsive. These folks replicated the procedures and got socially valid outcomes. This slide is missing one. There's a group from New Zealand that just published an article on behavioral interventions. That's a school-based model where they used this process and got a socially meaningful outcome, meaning no problem behavior when implemented by teachers all day, every day. Not sessions, not functional control only. This is relevant people saying the problem is solved. I'm not trying to toot a horn here. What I'm trying to do is help you get out of the policies and procedures I feel you're trapped by. You feel like you have to check the damn box. Is it attention or escape? Because you got to go to the IP meeting or court, or because your company requires that. Change it. Do not let courts, insurance companies, or administrators dictate clinical process. Let evidence. Look at these studies. This is evidence. This study is perhaps the strongest evidence, so I'll spend a moment on it. This, too, is a consecutive control case study design published by my colleague, now colleague, past student, Dr. Joshua Jessel. He's now at Queens. At the time, he was down in Texas. This was an intensive outpatient program where kids were insured to go to a hospital for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 2 weeks. Dr. Jessel and his colleagues ran this assessment treatment process with those kids. In the first week, the whole treatment was done. The second week was all parent training and transfer back to the home. The black dots in the first column represent 25 consecutive kids with autism with severe problem behavior admitted to the intensive outpatient program. That's their base rate. The white represents the rate of problem behavior when treatment was implemented, fully developed and implemented by parents. All kids had a reduction. He also reports a variety of social validity measures. I call it pulling just one. I want you to attend to the second one, which is perhaps the most important one. It's not, did the treatment work? That's not a good question. That's not a social validity question, in fact. That's a question of indirect assessment of efficacy. A social validity question is, was the effect meaningful, or are you satisfied with the amount of change? That's what Mont Wolf was asking us to ask our constituents. When Dr. Jessel and his team asked parents that, 22 out of 25 were highly satisfied with the outcome. 3 were moderately satisfied. Show me any evidence that comes close to this with other assessment procedures. Show me a DA leading to this. Show me a standard functional analysis leading to this. I'm sorry to be brash. I'm not generally an overconfident person. I'm just done seeing people trapped in undignified, fairly ineffective procedures, trotting it around as though it's great science. Why does synthesis work? Let's go back and be a little scientific. I'm not going to do these studies because I'm done with these studies, to be honest. When people apply to my program and want to do kind of things like this, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to go to a better program. I'm really curious about generality. I'm curious about maintenance. I'm curious about prevention. I'm curious about working with kids that don't get to see us much, kids with language and all that. But nevertheless, someone's going to ask these questions, I hope, and it's this. Why does synthesis work? It could be because there's more reinforcers. It could merely be a magnitude effect. It could be because varied reinforcers keep the situation enriched. It could be because they get choice. Choice is a powerful reinforcer. So it could be that by having multiple reinforcers, there's some choice. It could be that there's an interaction between these reinforcers, and that's probably going on there. That's why synthesized reinforcers work. What do I mean by work? It means we can get controlled analyses done in a half hour. It means we can get FCT off the ground in 20 minutes. That's what I mean by work. Maybe these are the factors. So if you need to do a thesis and you want to do some analytics, these might be cool things to consider. But for me, I'm going to use a metaphor because I want you to understand this concept and the power of it. And it's actually a hypothetical construct, which is a bad thing to use generally in our world, okay? But I'm using it just as a heuristic. I want you to think about this. So let's just call it a metaphor so we can forgive the use of it. I want you to think about greater motivational distance traveled. That's the metaphor. So, do you hear that noise? Because sometimes I think I'm just like a little losing sometimes. And I'll hear something someday. I'm sure it's happening, but that's why I always check in. So you're hearing that too. Okay. Great. So let's, what's that? Someone said something funny. I wanted to hear it. How many SLPs are in the room? Speech language pathologists. Okay, great. Thank you for being here. Because you're in the minority, we're going to make fun of you now. Because we're bullies. That's how I'm supposed to be a bully. No, I'm just kidding. Let's say you're an SLP, though, and you're charged with teaching the kid the first man. And you're hanging around with BCBAs, and they said, oh, I did a preference assessment. I might be able to help you. Skittles is the #1 item. Okay, very good. Oh, by the way, here's my razor. I want you to take that Skittle. I want you to cut it into 16ths to avoid satiation. Okay? And so as the SLP, you're going to approach that young learner who doesn't have a manned repertoire yet. You're going to approach them with that Skittle sliver. And so now let's take the child's perspective. This handsome young person, beautiful young lady perhaps, is approaching me with something colorful on their finger. I think it's a Skittle. I like Skittles. So before the SLP approached them, they were here. Let's just say they were in their middle period. They were like, let's call it mindful, and we'll be hip. They're just mindful. Everything's good. It's not bad. It's not awesome. They're just right there, right in the center. And then some handsome person shows up with that colorful Skittle sliver, and they're like, oh, that's a Skittle. I'm yearning now. I want that. So there's a little worsening. I want. And then they say ska. And I go, sure, ska. And they give me that colorful sliver, and I'm like, ooh, tasty. So now I just traveled from yearning to having earned and consumed that Skittle. That's the motivational distance travel. There's a little movement there, yeah? Let's take some of those more reinforcers characteristic of the control and variable problem behavior. Let's talk about tangibles. I'm in my good place. I'm in my center. Someone shows up with an iPad. Ooh, I love iPads. I'm yearning. iPad, please? Or, here, calm down. And they get the iPad. That's motivational distance traveled. Attention. Everything's cool. Why are you talking to him? Talk to me. I want some love. Stop that. Got some love. Traveled. One more. I'm in my center. Hey, kid, do this work that you're not good at. Oh, I hate work. You don't have to. Got out of work. Relief. Traveled. But you think about the EO pushes you back. The reinforcer pushes you forward. The distance traveled might be evident by that blue line. Skittle slivers, butt tangibles, escape, attention. That's the distance. But to be honest, it's really not like that when you do an analysis. So let's get a little smarter about this. The schematic might look more like this. If you isolate your reinforcers, let's just take the demand condition. The kid just experienced the tangible. They just experienced the tension. The tangible's gone. There's no love. You're all demandy. So now the child's in their spot, and you say, hey, kid, do that work. So now the EO's in place, the instruction's there. But please understand, there's other EOs operating, even though we're not tacting them. They still might be pining for some love from the attention condition, right? They still might be pining for their iPad. There's multiple EOs. And then they hit themselves, and what do they get? A break. And now here we are. Still with the EO operating. Maybe that's why we get a lot of escalation when we try to isolate reinforcers. So not only is conceptually maybe impossible, it's also risky. And if we want to move these processes outside of hospitals and highly resourced places, we need to make different procedural decisions. But still, the blue line is that long. So, incomplete distance traveled. Maybe that's why some functional analyses look like that, because of that small distance traveled and the EO operating. Maybe that's why some kids don't learn a communication response after their functional analysis. You should be concerned about that. I never was. I was like, well, they got a longer history of problem behavior. They have mental retardation. I had all the excuses. If a child can't pick up a mand for the thing they're supposedly engaging in severe problem behavior with, you don't have the right thing. They should pick up a mand in 20 minutes, not 20 weeks. Okay. Maybe it's because the distance traveled is too small. Now let's talk about when you combine contingencies. I'm going to fall off the stage, and that would be great. I should do it on purpose because that'll be memorable. You'll never forget the point, but I'm going to do my best not to. I'm in my center position, carefully in my center position. When you use a combined contingency, you also capitalize in combined EO, so it goes like this. Oh, there's the iPad. Oh, I love iPads. Why is he talking to that person? I want some love. Hey, can you sit over there? Nope, no one's complying with my mans. God damn it. I got to do what work? I hate this work. I'm not good at it. You know what? I'm just going to go in my autistic bubble. I'm just going to get my groove on. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Nope, block, block. Shh, shh. Damn, I can't even do that. And then they manned my way. You don't have to do your work. Here's your iPad. I'm ready for you. I'm giving you some love. I'm here for you. You want me to sit where? You bet. Comply with your mans. Can I? Yeah, you can get your groove on. Go ahead. Stereotypy's a reinforcer. Go for it. Okay. That's motivational distance traveled. That's the blue line. Don't forget about interactions. Let's talk about them real quick. Work sucks more when there's something fun to do. Something fun is more fun when you got out of work. Okay. Sometimes even stereotypy is more fun when you got an audience. You know, a lot of kids with autism, they want to tap, and they want to show you what they're doing. They want you to be involved in it. Okay. Those are interactions. So the blue line stretches even more when you combine, perhaps. Maybe that's why functional analyses, when you combine, look like this most of the time within 5 minutes. And FCT gets off the ground within 15 minutes. Please don't forget this concept. I know it's a construct. Motivational distance traveled. If your program isn't working, ask yourself the question, am I moving the kid enough? Or am I using little bitty reinforcers and I've just got little blue lines in their world? Big blue lines. We'll get to little blue lines, the stuff of life, later, but let's use big blue lines to manage the situation from the start. Again, none of this is new. B.F. Skinner, he's important to a lot of folks. Me too. He said this, a common source of misunderstanding is the neglect of what happens when variables are combined in different ways. Although a functional analysis begins with isolated relations, an important part of his task is to show how its variables interact. This was said in the 50s. The time is now. Combine the reinforcers to get effects. He asked us to do it a long time ago. Let's get to some non-negotiables. What do you need to know from a functional analysis? I want you to think about that for a minute. How do you know you're done? What do you need to know? I changed my tune on this. This is what I think I need to know. I need to know that I can turn off problem behavior. If I can't turn it off, I'm not willing to go to treatment, because I know I'm going to have to add in some BMOD stuff eventually anyway. If I can't turn it on and off in an analysis, how am I going to get it to work when implemented by 14 staff in a group home 24/7? I need to be able to turn it on and off. BCBAs who consult, if you want people to do your programming, show them that you can turn behavior on and off. There is no greater relationship with direct care staff and teachers than when you do it first. It's worth 25 minutes to build that relationship. Second, I need to know I can turn it on. I need to know we have motivation. Third, I need to know that it's not made up stuff. It's not a kitchen sink approach. We do not tease kids in the analysis. We do not inspire them with things they've never seen before. It's all ecologically relevant, personalized from the interview. Okay. Take a look at that analysis. Are we ready to go to treatment? Yes or no? I want you to ask yourself that question. And why do you think that? Yes. And why do you think that? There you go. You're able to turn it on and off. You can see it in the control conditions. So I think Mark is right on. I agree with you. But I want to point out something that I'm not necessarily saying you graph it this way, but I want you to think about it this way. When I show aggregated data like this, it could be that he engaged in 20 responses once in one cluster and then was fairly insensitive to the representations of the EO. Or perhaps he engaged in one problem behavior during the EO but 19 in reinforcement. That would show a lack of control. So let's look at those black data points I've unpacked into panels now. Each of those 3 panels represents that black data point blown out into a second-by-second analysis. The diamonds are the emission of a problem behavior. The line is the reinforcement interval. If the line is not there, that's the EO. Mark is completely right. Because of these data, Because problem behavior is never occurring during the reinforcer. Check. Because problem behavior, the latency to emitting it when reinforcement is withdrawn is very short. Check. That's control. That's really what you're looking for when you do the analysis. I'm going to show you an example in a minute where I'm going to put that same kind of graph up, and Mark and I are going to look at it, we're going to go, yep, that looks good. But I'm going to show you within session data, and it wasn't good. Don't graph it this way. That's a hassle, okay? Think about this. When you do the analysis, it should turn on quickly, it should turn off quickly and completely. That's the control we're looking for, okay? You can infer it by that 2 a minute thing, but even then, that could get you into hot water. So this is just a thinking guide. I want you to really understand what we mean by turning on and turning off. It's a second-by-second phenomenon, okay? We talked about this. You can aggregate it. You don't need to do a progressive extinction analysis. Whenever somebody does this, reported behaviors tend to be controlled by the same contingency. So we don't know that from our analyses. I don't know if all I see is foot stomping, if SIB is certainly maintained by that contingency. So understand, you have to admit a little ignorance. But you can if you can alert the constituents of your information to the data, the research showing that if you know this, you know that. Please don't put kids in unsafe situations because people don't believe that for that child. Use the literature, it exists. These references are in your PowerPoint. One last thing. Let's say you're wrong. Let's say the controlling variable for SIB is indeed different than that for foot stomping. You will figure that out when you do treatment. It's called response to intervention. Most people know it for other reasons. Let treatment teach you whether or not you have the right contingency. If treatment's all done and all the behaviors are zero, that's called affirming the consequent. It's a Sidman tactic. When you can't experiment, can't analyze, you can affirm. And that's a great affirming moment, that if you guessed that they were members of the same response class and your treatment still influences behavior, and all said and done, you were probably correct. The stuff in red is all the stuff I'm ignorant of when I'm done with the analysis. Prepare to be bludgeoned by some colleagues by your ignorance. I don't know the single operant function of each topography of behavior because I didn't run 7 analyses. I don't know whether problem behavior is maintained by positive and negative reinforcement. I could care less. And guess what? That's not new. Jack Michael wrote several articles on maybe the distinction between the two is irrelevant. Alan Barron wrote several articles talking about whether the distinction was irrelevant, that the distinction was probably irrelevant. If you've ever taught ABA and you've gone over positive and negative reinforcement, the student has tricked you into giving an example where you are stumped. That's a little bit of positive, it's a little bit negative. Well, man, that was presented, so... That's an indicator that our language system doesn't have the greatest fit with nature. I'm not running from the concepts of positive and negative. I'll still use them, but I don't worry if I don't know whether it's one or the other, because I know I can't know that without extraordinary analytics, and even then I may not be able to know it because the concept of holism precludes that. Third, the whole notion of a true or false positive. People write about this. Well, you got 4 reinforcers, 1 of them may be false. Sure, 2 of them may be false. 3 of them may be false. I don't care. If I can turn on behavior, I can turn off behavior, I can effectively and socially, in a meaningful way, treat the behavior, it's irrelevant. So I won't be distracted by that. I don't care about the boxes. Please remove boxes from your forms if you can. Last thing, high rates. Well, this... Just stand right there. There you go. High rates are not... High rates are not to be celebrated in a functional analysis. It's not about high rates. And this is what I was getting at a moment ago. Take a look at that analysis. It looks lovely. It's publishable. There's control. We're turning behavior on and off. But let me let you in on the inside story. I don't have consent for video, so I'm going to show it to you this way. When the EO was presented, there was a long period of time and there was no problem behavior. And once problem behavior happened, it happened throughout the reinforcement interval, and that little asterisk shows that we indeed had to terminate the session. This is with an older woman in her 30s who engaged in very severe self-injury and aggression. She was language able. The EO was a little too strong, and the context we were evaluating was a little too provocative. I did not know at the time that her boyfriend was in the room. So once she went off, she articulated later that she was embarrassed and upset. And that she was. She hit herself, and then she was crying and attacking people. There was also part of the contingency, part of the EO was to change the rules of the game, kind of playing Uno. Then we changed the rules of the game. Well, the rules that the decisions of how we're going to change the game were a little too severe. So it was like reverse. She said, well, I want it to go this way. We were like, no, reverse now means pick up 10. And that hurt her to the core. Her sense of justice was just, so treaded upon. She was very upset. We tried a couple times, and this analysis is not good. So please understand that control on that graph is not to be celebrated. High rates are not to be celebrated. This is out of control. There's a long latency to problem behavior. It doesn't turn off quickly. That's not where you want to go to treatment from. We simply redesigned the analysis based on conversations with staff. This isn't a great outcome either, but it's a lot safer and more dignifying for this young lady. There's shorter latencies to problem behavior. It's turning off, generally speaking, during reinforcement. Now I feel confident we can move to treatment. I'm not asking you to graph this way. I want you to think this way. Differentiation in an analysis, when you see it, please know, is not enough. Are there sub-criterion responses? Is the child crying? Is there short latency to turn it on? Is there short latency to turn it off? That's the evidence I need to go to treatment. And that's the evidence my research and practice group needs to produce before we're allowed to go to treatment. Okay? So understand these tidy little graphs I'm showing you are for convenience. They're convention in our field, but they're insufficient. Please understand the mission is to turn on and turn off. And please understand the depth of that mission and the importance of it. Okay. My understanding is we have 35 minutes. I work very hard to keep this short so we could have a conversation. So I want to have that conversation. So let's do it like this. I want you to just privately come up with a question about, I've only talked about assessment. I'm supposed to stay on this thing. Here we go. We're only going to talk about assessment. We'll talk about treatment after lunch. So if you have any questions about assessment, I want to hear from you. What I'd really love you to do is to write down a question or a comment. Commit to something, a question or a comment. Write it down, type it out, share it with your neighbors. And then when I say, okay, let's talk, I want you to point to somebody that has a good question or comment, and I will call on them. Be subtle. Okay. 2 minutes. Good luck. Questions or comments? It's done. I solved it. We're good. Look at this. Shit. How long did you know this? Did you just figure this out? It's the frickin' Repeat the question. And so, Josue is a question. Yeah, I'll repeat it.
We can do like a parametric analysis where we throw everything in there and slowly fade it out.
Okay. The question Josue asked is, can you do the synthesized contingency and then do something akin to a component analysis or even a parametric analysis? Parametric usually refers to kind of a numerical level of the controlling variable, but nevertheless, the point is there. Could you just slowly remove things? I would call that a component analysis, okay? The reason why I don't recommend it, and could you? Of course. Are there examples of that? Yes. The reason why I don't recommend it is this. One, as you remove those things, you may create an unsafe situation for you and your client. You may have multiple EOs operating, but you're only giving parts of the reinforcer back when you do your component analysis. Second, just because you remove, just because something isn't controlling behavior as you do your component analysis doesn't mean it wasn't relevant in the synthesized context. That's what those studies showed, that when they're together, you have control of behavior, but when they're assessed separately, there was no control. It's a conundrum. Things work differently when they're together than when they're apart. Our tradition is analyst. It's in our title. We're analysts. That means to break down. We so badly want to break it down, but we have to wrap our heads around the concept that certain things, as we break them down, are now different. They are no longer emulating nature. I think we have been behaving many ways for many years unnaturally, in a sense. We're breaking up nature at the wrong points. Skinner talked about natural lines of fracture when you're trying to understand behavior. He talked about natural lines of fracture. These are the natural breaks in response classes, let's say. I think we've been breaking at the wrong points. As people want to do these component analyses, I think we're breaking at the wrong points. We're taking things that go together, and they are one thing together when we're trying to say, but is it A, B, or C? They're fundamentally different now. And we're getting deluded into thinking that because this isn't controlling behavior here, it must be irrelevant there. And I don't think that's the case. Data show that. And so, but it's hard. I mean, I've been thinking about functional assessment for 25 years. Please know that this thought that I'm sharing with you right now took 22 years to percolate. And I'm a bit of a dumbass if you talk to some of my buddies back home, but I'm not that much of a dumbass. So 22 years. It's because we're analysts, and we think the truth can be found in analysis, and often it can, but not always. And this might be an example of not always. So I'll be very frank. I would discourage such an endeavor. The last part is, if you're a practitioner, your goal is to treat. And we're showing we can get effective treatment outcomes without that analytic stuff. And, Tim Bowen makes great points about, well, but for science, we may need to know these things. I think there's a whole bunch of great translational questions we can ask without breaking apart these contingencies. You could do matching law studies with the whole contingency. So that we're just trapped by our language game. We've got to get out of our language system. We're only doing things because we have good language to arrange them, but I'm getting into nonsensical. Thanks for the question. Okay. Let's go with Mark, just because they're close and I can hear the question.
During treatment and training, every once in a while we get a big effect.
Yeah.
And instead of going with a little bit of skittle, we do the Big Bang Theory. Give them everything.
Okay.
To make the training memorable. So what you're saying is to turn on and off the behavior, try the Big Bang effect, throw everything in the kitchen sink at them. If you can turn on the behavior and off the behavior, you're on the right track.
I won't be able to repeat everything Mark said, but basically his point was he too finds greater therapeutic benefit when he throws a lot of reinforcers at the child rather than merely splicing it up in one thing at a time model. I agree, but I want to make something very clear. I don't like it called the kitchen sink approach, and I don't throw all the reinforcers at kids. I have a whole bunch of things in the clinic. I'm like, you've never had this, kid, but this will rock your world. You know what I mean? You haven't had Funyuns yet? There we go. So I'm only throwing things at kids that people have reported they've already thrown them at kids, and they've thrown them at kids to redirect from problematic behavior. And so please know that there's that little ecological validity point that can never be proven. You can't prove ecological validity. You can only approach it. And I ask that you make a serious effort to approach it and not just take powerful reinforcers and slap them in the situation. I think we're saying the same things, though.
The stuff that we know will float his boat.
That's exactly right. And we know what floats his boats by doing an interview with people who know what floats his boat. Yes, ma'am. Oh, good. You pointed someone out. That's the best. Just say it. Yeah.
Behaviors that may have an automatic reinforcement component, a lung condition,
Good.
things like mouthing, and
Very good.
we talked about pica, and what if there, I guess two things, like how do you turn that on off, what does that look like, and what if the primary reinforcer is like unsafe, like if it's adjusting and mouthing is
Very good. And I like that you got a lot in those questions there because there's like 3 of you asking it too, which is really it's going to be really hard to repeat. But anyways, it's a super question. No. Listen, you nailed it. It's a very good question. I just avoid the topic of automatic reinforcement in the morning thing. I'm going to get to it in treatment, okay? But let's just talk about it. For some kids, and I'm going to take things at a time. So if you didn't hear it, the question is about, well, what about automatic reinforcement? You didn't talk about that much. And problem behavior is controlled by automatic reinforcement. And what about if the reinforcers are themselves inappropriate or undesirable? For some kids, they might like to spit on every glass they see and spit play, just as a simple example, okay? And so let's talk about those things. So first things first. I believe a lot of kids engage in what we call socially mediated problem behavior. They're trying to use aggression to get out of doing shite they don't want to do the shite they do want to do. And the stuff they do want to do often involves sensory reinforcers. Spit play, touching their privates, a little bit of motor stereotypy, vocal stereotypy, inappropriate sexual behavior, wandering, looking out the window, eye gazing. Are you with me? Those are all behaviors that are presumably automatically reinforced. I don't go around putting them in a bunch of conditions to tease it out. I'll be honest, most of the time I can kind of see it and go, yeah, when left on their own, they're doing this and no one's looking at them, and okay, so be it. So we're going to write that in as that's part of the reinforcer if that behavior is acceptable to be emitted in the context and or just the topography is okay. So now I'm going to talk about the ones where it's not okay. So I want to make it clear, though, automatically reinforced behavior are considered in the model, and they're leveraged. They're part of the synthesized contingency. We make it very clear. During the EO, block motor stereotypy, shush the vocal stereotypy. During reinforcement, let them get their groove on. Make it very clear. It's all available, nothing's available to start. Okay. I'm going to go off into a side note that you didn't ask, and I'm going to come back to those tougher behaviors because I need time to think. Just kidding. The side note is this. Please know that this big blue line that I'm trying to throw the metaphor at you in this distance, it's not always there. It's there in the beginning and in the middle of the therapeutic process, but our ultimate goal is to get back to short blue lines. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm foreshadowing treatment. In the beginning, the kid says, my way, they get everything. They go from here to here, big distance traveled. At the end of treatment, though, it might look like this. Excuse me, Mom, yes, buddy, can I stop doing chores and can I just, play? And she's like, yeah, you don't have to do any more of those chores. That's okay. He says, can I play video games? No video games right now because I'm on the phone. I need you to play something quiet. Okay. Can you come play with me? No, I'm on the phone. Okay, no problem. You know what? I don't need to take this call anymore. Let me come play. Good job handling disappointment. Do you see what I'm doing right there? The probability of a yes or no, it's always a maybe. It may happen, it may not happen. The reinforcers aren't all slapped in together at once at the end of the process. Demands are highly specific. Do you see what I'm saying? So we use this big motivational distance at the beginning. So it might look like this. The child goes off, and I'm going to show you this in treatment. They go off into this space, and they say, okay, you don't have to do work. What would you like to do? They'd say, can I jiggle? And you're like, I don't know, look around, can you? It's like, yeah, it's a classroom. No one minds doing it. Okay, go for it. But they're out in the community. They say, can I jiggle? No, look around. That's good. People can think you're weird. Okay. So we have parents and teachers act like life coaches. They teach them about the ambient stimulation and they try to get it to come under control, those things. So please understand the treatment is complicated. This ISCA thing is easy. I'm spending 3 hours on easy because it's the foundation upon which the complex treatment process is built. But treatment can be hard to get at that very normative, spliced up reinforcer sort of interaction that we know we need to get everyone to. Okay? Okay. Third, the behaviors that they can't emit. So let's talk about some of them. Some kids engage in problem behavior that is actually maintained by access to some sexual stimulation. So I know a lot of young adults who love nothing more than 4 young ladies laying on him in the hallway. Do you see what I'm saying? Restraint often becomes a reinforcer for teenagers. Imagine that. Some kids engage in problem behavior like that spit play thing. Some kids engage in, and we're not going to get to, we'll get to headbang and all that in a minute, but let's just talk about those like inappropriate sexual behaviors and all that. What we do is we come up with proxies or approximates to put in the reinforcement interval, and we clearly don't let them, and we block and restrict access to the sensory reinforcers for the topographies we can't handle. So for instance, if you look at some of Kathleen Piazza's early work, and she was doing match stimulation studies, and so a kid had spit play, he could not spit play was blocked, but on reinforcement he had one mirror and he had some shaving cream and he was allowed to do the play there. That's a proxy. It's an approximate to the reinforcer and it's available as part of the synthesized outcome. For kids for whom physical interaction, especially when it's sexual, comes into play, we have a whole different process. We have a whole process about sexuality. Do they know how to masturbate? Is everyone okay with that? Do they have the skill? Are the meds getting in the way of it? Is it under proper stimulus control? That's a whole different thing, and I can't go down that path, but please understand that we accommodate it. Let's talk about something it's just mere physical interaction that's a reinforcer, but they love to be restrained and wrestled and all that stuff. What we do is part of the synthesized contingency is to come up with proxies. So I'll tell you about one boy. His father loves to wrestle him at home, body slam. He's a big boy. He likes to be squeezed. He likes his dad to like elbow drop on him, and they're really rough, but the teacher just can't do that. So he's a big boy. He loves to stand on tables. He just looks at people like, what are you going to do? You're going to have to grab me. You know, and that sort of thing. Or he likes to lay down, like flop. And I've never met a skinny flopper, right? Floppers they're always big kids. And so he's one of those big guys, and so he stands on tables and flops. He's just looking for the physical. Okay, it's fairly evident, turn on, off, okay. But we can't do some of those things. So we just talked to the team and come up with proxies, and they did a great job. So this is what it was. He had a little choice board. He could arm wrestle. He had one of those balance boards with a little tube balance on it, and someone held his hands. It was very physical. He was a big boy. Hold him up on the balance thing. We also came up with, we've done this in group homes. Randy, do you mind? We play a little sumo wrestling game. He can choose it. There's duct tape on the floor. It's a circle. We grab our hands like this. We put our forearms against each other, and our job is to push each other out of the circle. We're not allowed to touch bodies. Whoever steps out, they're the loser. And we teach them good sportsmanship. Good job. You won. Point. Let's play again. It's physical, but there's no touching. It's safe. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think you're right on that there are a lot of problem behaviors that are maintained by reinforcers that we're clearly not comfortable providing following a picture hand. You know what I mean? But we can come up with approximates. And I want you just to work on those approximates and make sure there's many. Don't shoot for the one. Just put them in there and give kids choices of all these things that are approximate to the thing that you think is managing the behavior. Okay, last thing on this one. Last thing I promise is, what about, is there some problem behavior that's exclusively maintained by automatic reinforcement? I believe that's true. It's usually head directed, head hitting, head banging, so around the head. Please know that most self-injury, including hand-to-head and head-to-object, is socially mediated. So if you look at any of these surveys, it's socially mediated. But there are some kids for whom it's clearly sensory reinforced. There's some biochemical process controlling the behavior. We don't know much about it, but that's happening. Please understand that everything I said today is fairly irrelevant to them. I want to make that very clear. If the behavior is dangerous, exclusively dangerous, and exclusively maintained by automatic reinforcement, to me that's the last frontier of BMOD right now. We're going to use DROs with arbitrary reinforcers. We're going to use restraints, restrictive procedures, fading. We're going to try to inspire with cookies and all that. Now, is there a little more to it? I suggest you see some of Lou Agopian's work, probably the only one doing something interesting in automatic SIB bill right now that's really doing something that's teaching. But that is a sad last frontier. But let me end on something more hopeful. Even when I think, oh man, this is probably only automatically reinforced, I'm wrong. Almost all those kids, that behavior is partly socially mediated. And if it's partly socially mediated, there's hope because you can manage that part and let that which is left over be managed through BMARD. But try to find if you can control the behavior. So let me just give you an example. You talk to staff, they say it happens everywhere, there's no way to turn it off, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's come up with our best. What are the things that people use to redirect that seem to be powerful? What are the conditions where it's a little lower, a little higher? I'm going to do my analysis. If I can get some variance in that behavior by what I can do, there's hope. I'm going to build my treatment from that. And you can even leverage the social reinforcers against the automatic reinforcers. So when I get to treatment, I'll tell you what I mean by that. But you can extend the social reinforcers out till there's a period of time without the automatically reinforced self-injury. So there's still stuff to do there. Okay. Thanks for that question. It's very important, and I always skirt the issue. Thanks for keeping me honest. Okay. Very good. I should go to a different area. So, yes, woman, yes? Good. So this is the question is, what do you do when emotional behavior seems to seep over into the reinforcement? I have to ask a clarifying question. Is this a very young child without language, or is this an older child with really good language? More developed language skills. Okay. And you're getting crying, emotional behavior in the reinforcement interval because you think something happened during the presentation of the EO that's upsetting? Yes. No. You can talk normal to me. I do the same. Yeah. Yes. Great. Again, hard for me to repeat this, but basically you're describing learners for whom the mere presentation of the EO, like programming so the child loses, is sufficient to either yield some emotional behavior later or they're languaging about that interaction so much that they're not engaged or consuming the reinforcer, and then that's affecting behavior later on in your analytic process. Sure. No, I get that. Yeah, even if you get the win, there's still this little problem behavior percolating through, and okay, very good. What do? Understand that the analysis teaches us whether we got it right or wrong. So if I do the analysis and we make our best guess, we design it, and that's happening, I know it's not right yet. Sometimes mere exposure to the game, okay, it's a game, mere exposure to the game is often enough to get the emotional behavior to go away, like you saw for Jeffrey, and to get the languaging to go away because the EOs become so short because they realize the game. For some kids with language where it's still persisting a little bit, we do, this isn't in the published literature, and so I'm going to take some wax for this, but you know, if you're a practitioner, you've got to do stuff that you don't read, okay? So we do reflection periods with kids with language. When they leave session, we say, do you want to tell us anything? Do you want to talk about what just happened? Do you know what we're doing? Do you think we should do something different? Those are typical reflection questions to occasion kids to language outside of the session to help me better design the session so they're simply being controlled by the contingency in the session and not talking about it. The language is getting in the way in the session, right? And so that's something we're now doing with this because we're dealing with a lot more kids with language now that are higher functioning, older, and all that. And our analytic processes sometimes hurt kids on the spectrum, in particular that have good language, to their core. So we put an EO in place, and they can't wrap their head around the fact that we just grabbed their iPad. They spent their whole life learning that grabbing is bad. And this professional just kind of yanked an iPad from the hand, and they just can't get over it. They're just looking through the glass, like talking to the mom, like, did you see what this person did? This person should be arrested. You know what I mean? So there's that. So we're very careful about how we interact with kids. If we think we've crossed those lines, we use those reflection periods to kind of talk through it, and we just try to get on to treatment. I don't want to spend a lot of time in analysis, Phil. I want to get to treatment because I don't get a lot of this baloney in treatment. Once the kids, like I say, okay, we're going to play the game my way, they're like, my way, please. I'm like, okay. So there's no opportunity for those issues to come up once I'm in treatment because we're asking for such little behavior to produce such a big outcome that they engage in that little behavior and just get there. And then we stretch the chains of behavior to get that same outcome to, make it a treatment. The issue comes in the analysis. And so I want to get through the analysis as fast as possible. And with these language-able kids, we're learning how to give them more control in the process. So that's not a great answer. I think part of the answer I want you to remember the most is this. If you expose them to that EO a number of times and immediately reinforce the earliest member of the response class, that stuff will probably go away. That really is the main tactic here. Okay. Thank you for that question. Okay, let's go here. Yes, sir.
Just to add to that, so are you in that session data adding the languaging in?
Very good. The question was, are you adding the languaging back in as part of the response class in those analyses that I've shown you within session or the aggregate? The answer is generally no, unless people report it's a precursor to the severe behavior that led them to visit us. So I'm only going to include things that people report are members of the same response class. Some of this languaging is really occasioned by the artificiality of the analysis. It's not part of their repertoire that then leads to the next member, not part of that escalation chain. So it depends, but some kids it is, right? Negotiating is the first response. You saw that with that little boy newly diagnosed with autism. He was negotiating with his mom about keeping the iPad a little longer, and then it escalated. If that's the case, then you bet that might be a target behavior. Some of these things we might call languaging too are hard to operationally define and measure, so that's another reason sometimes they fall out of the measures because we weren't poised to easily count them and thus not reinforce them. So it's just a practical issue sometimes. Okay. Yes, miss?
I appreciate a lot. What you are doing is taking the science out of the lab to bring it to the real life.
We hope, yes.
Communication, I always use the in vivo situation, have the parents actually model the child. It's paralleling so much behavior-wise, and I've been doing that really knowing what I'm doing exactly similar path.
Yes. Sure, okay.
Do you think any part in your assessment who is going to be with the child saying it is true for the teachers? And I have speech therapists definitely not wanting to do ABA, and 2 years later she became the best therapist in the team. But how do you take that into the picture when you do the assessment?
And so what I'm trying to take into the picture is people's different levels of understanding and commitment to therapeutic processes based on ABA. Okay, very good. To me, the critical part is starting with an open-ended interview where you don't ask typical developmental assessment questions that they've been asked a million times, that you're not going to do anything with that information, that you are very pragmatic and you agree on your common goal. That's the first thing we do in the interview. So we're going to work together for this outcome. We're trying to get problem behavior to be 0 in this context. Okay. So first we do goal clarification. Second, I ask them to tell me stories about the problem. I think it's very important you just let people talk. Just tell me the story, and then I'm listening, jotting down notes, and pulling out possible contingencies. I think that's a critical part of the process. I know it seems so simplistic. Goal clarification. Let people talk and be a very good listener and allow them to teach you. Don't throw your expertise out too soon. I let people teach me stuff. Then I start teaching by saying, what I'm hearing is this. If I have to go back and talk about reinforcement, so be it. If I know I don't need to do that, I'll move forward. I always articulate what I'm doing the analysis for, what it's going to look like. I always ask people, are you worried? Do you have any concerns about what we're about to do next? Tell them to me. Then I make sure they're with me, and then we turn problem behavior on and off together. It sounds maybe too simple, but to me, that's how we develop good relationships. That's the process. I do it when it comes to assessing and treating sleep problems. It's the same thing. I need to figure out what our goals are, and then I'm going to do an interview, and you're going to teach me about the situation. Then I'm going to educate you a little bit on biology and environmental determinants of sleep. Then we're going to build a treatment that fits. What are your fears? Okay, let's change that aspect of the treatment. We're off. And so I think that's where you get the buy-in, irrespective of different levels of commitment. I will throw this one thing out there. I don't see parents or teachers as being more or less committed till later. Everyone appears to me as committed from the beginning. Maybe I just got rose-colored lenses, right? But I just think we're all on the same page, everything's lovely. The lack of commitment, perhaps, comes later. There's, they're looking at their phone or the project, what have you, okay. When I see a lack of commitment, people aren't showing up to clinic appointments, we go home and it's apparent they haven't practiced the skills, things of that nature, all those indicators. We do have a second level thing we do, and it's sloppy, and I don't talk about it because we haven't made it technological yet, but it's basically a soft version of ACT, A-C-T. I'm not an ACT therapist, I'm not trained in it, I'm not suggesting you get training in it, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, I have no opinion to share there. We simply take Steve Hayes' book called Get Out of Your Mind and Get Into Your Life, and we use some of those tools. We ask parents like, you told me your goal was we got to address this problem behavior, that it's killing the family and it's running the family. Okay. You seem somewhat detached from the process right now, so let's talk about this. Have you thought about what's going to happen when you're not around for your child when they're 10, 20 years older now? So we go down that road. We go down roads, we saying, if this is terrible, but if we have the relationship, we say, if you were to die tomorrow and someone was giving you a memoriam, what would they say about you as a parent? Is that what you want to be remembered as a parent? How do you want to be remembered as a parent? And so we have that conversation. And then we talk about, are you living consistent with those goals or values? Now let's go back to the process. Let's get committed. So sometimes we do a little pull out, and it's, I'm not saying we're even that good at it. We're just kind of making it up from the book. But sometimes I think it's very helpful. It allows our relationship to be stronger because we just kind of get things out. So I will tell you that our process involves never letting things slide. We're a very open group. We've taken a long time to mature into this, but nowadays with my research and practice group, if some parent is acting in a way that we think isn't optimal, we call them on it. And we ask them to call them on our BS behavior as well. And we just try to be really open. So that's what I got for you. Okay, very good. We have, it looks like 5 minutes. Okay. People in the back never ask questions, so let's go with a person in the back. Very good. So the question is, if you're, let's just, I'll add some, you're in public schools, public school classroom, and you're consulting for a particular child, and the question is, should you do the process, the analysis in particular, in the classroom, or should you do pull-out? Generally speaking, what we try to do is ask the administrator and the teacher what their preferences are. Sometimes they don't match. And under those conditions, we go with what the teacher prefers, and we tell the administrator, is it okay if we do it this way? Because she said or he said they prefer that. So we really like to follow the teacher's lead. That's the main thing. The teacher does not want you in the classroom. You can say all you want how this is going to be dignified and safe and quiet. That may not be the case, so that's a relationship issue if you're wrong. But even if it is, the teacher just might be like, I don't want to do it here. I don't want to be part of it. I want you to kind of figure something out and then tell me later, sort of thing. I'm fine with that. However, someone needs to be there. So usually the para will come with me or someone like that. So someone needs to be part of it. Where we do it, it's up to people. I prefer, to be honest, a pull-out. I prefer to go to the cafeteria, the vice principal's side office, and do this stuff. And here's why. People get really weirded out by, well, if you do something over there, then you still got to transfer it back. It's true. But there's all this cool research now, and I want some, pay attention to it on this whole notion of how important context is. And if you try to do analysis in your skill-based treatment in the context in which kids have a year or a half year of practicing problem behavior there, you still may get resurgence and renewal of problem behavior in your therapeutic process. I want problem behavior to be zero throughout my therapeutic process, almost like an errorless process. And you're more likely to get that when you bring that child to a new space with a new person and you get up and build that repertoire. When you try to build the repertoire with people with a history, in a context with a history, there's going to be a lot more bumps on the road. Your problem behavior graph is going to be more bumpy. Okay? So that's something to really consider. Now, if you do it in the classroom, you're going to suffer some bumps, but you have a lot less effortful transition back to the classroom because you built it there. If you build it over here, you've got to spend some time transitioning it. So that's why I don't care, because I'm either going to have more time at the front end or the back end, but it's probably all comes out the same in the wash. That's generally what our experience teaches us, so I make it a negotiable. Where do you want us to do it? But by favor, the pull-out, because I want a clean context to build the repertoire. Okay. On that, we should probably end. I hope to see you after lunch. Thank you. Do you have an announcement?
Dr. Hanley, for such a wonderful talk. Just remember, we have the poster session today in Dean's Hall from 3:30 to 5:30. Those of you seeking social work CEUs, remember to sign in and out at the registration desk. Please complete an evaluation form in the app in Groupio. This is session 48. Dr. Hyunlee was the speaker, and the code for this session is C as in cat, O, B as in boy, 165. COB 165. Thank you very much.